The Mourning Sun. Prologue. Once upon a time, a summer of content was made inglorious winter by the morning sun of the Nile. The golden sand blanketed the precious treasures below, shielded from centuries of solar rays and windstorms. Time stood still behind a gilded mask within an ornate chamber, until brazenly unsealed and rudely disturbed. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of Egypt. Chapter 1. David Wade loved to walk. Walking was pleasant exercise, and it allowed him to keep his own counsel. As a youth, he had been encouraged by his elders, almost badgered, to go play outside and get some fresh air. The admonishments and accompanying guilt had stayed with him to this day. Whatever his crowded workdays brought, he always found some time to breathe in the great outdoors, and Central Park was the greatest of the outdoors crowded Manhattan had to offer. It was Sunday morning, the preordained day of rest, but not for David Wade. His standard work week consisted of 6 regular days at the office with his young executive assistant, Jenny Bradford. On Sundays, he labored solo from home, a multi-level penthouse flat atop the El Dorado building facing the park. The regularity of this schedule, however, was often interrupted by his many domestic and international business trips, leaving Jenny to manage his 64th floor enterprise in the majestic Empire State Building. His maverick working style, however, never really left him on his own. At all times, the members of his international team of experts, Denary, were electronically accessible to him. Denary was his mobile privy council. Central Park is perhaps the most celebrated urban park in the world and is the most visited green space in the United States. Established in 1857 on almost 800 acres of land acquired by the city, the park was designed and built by landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, the same man who also constructed Montreal's beautiful Mount Royal Park, a favorite of Wade's Canadian friend Julia Cartier. His thoughts turned to Julia as he walked past the park's Woolman Rink with the New York City skyline as its breathtaking backdrop. He imagined lacing on a pair of skates with his hockey-obsessed friend, innocently holding hands and twirling around the oval-shaped surface with her, as he had often done as a youth with several schoolmates of the opposite sex. The snow came early to the city on this first day of the 12th month. Snow in New York was sometimes the vivacity of nature gone mad. But this morning, the flakes were gentle, soft, big, and beautiful, nature's harmless offering. He enjoyed lovely winter days, but by mid-January, he tired of them and longed for the city's attractive women to resume walking the park with tanned legs pouring out of their summer shorts. Strolling past one of the park's many monuments, the impressive 180-ton, 70-foot-tall Cleopatra's Needle, originally erected in ancient Egypt around 1450 BC during the New Kingdom period, he smirked at the juxtaposition of this red granite obelisk anchored upon cold white ground, not hot golden sand. Amidst the falling snowflakes, Wade suddenly noticed the approach of 2 Middle Eastern-looking men. They stopped a few yards in front of him. "Mr. Wade? Mr. David Wade?" Wade slowed his pace, said nothing, but eyed them expectantly. The 2 men glanced at each other, then simultaneously moved closer to him. "Please come with us, sir." Chapter 2. The tips of his fingers touched in church steeple fashion. Wade was replaying his visit earlier that morning to the Consulate General of the Arab Republic of Egypt in New York. Jenny had come into the office that afternoon to help Wade prepare for his trip. He would be flown directly to Cairo on an Egyptian government airplane, departing in less than 3 hours. "Do I need to book you a passage to Cairo?" "No, Jen. My client has taken care of all travel arrangements. Do you need a ride to the airport? No thanks. The consulate is sending a car for me. Wade's petite assistant walked briskly in and out of his office, assembling his work-related carry-on items, her glossy blonde ponytail bobbing with the rhythm of her light steps. Jenny Bradford was a born and bred New Englander with a strict work ethic. Ever the perfectionist, she would walk over hot coals to straighten a slightly crooked wall frame. Punctual to a fault, Jenny was never late, showing her Yankee good manners. A dedicated worker, she was passionate about her job and appreciated its benefits, awarded to her by a demanding but generous and fair employer. All told, Jenny was making 6 figures, including regular bonuses. When Wade looked into her sharp blue eyes, he saw all the old Boston breeding she had inherited. Although friendly and kind, she remained mostly a mystery to him, a blank slate that had rarely been scribbled upon. He was totally oblivious to her personal life, though he assumed she had one. He liked her fair complexion, pretty face, and dainty ways, but kept those thoughts to himself. Unknown to Wade, Jenny had jealously guarded her chastity. She was still a virgin at 25, not by commitment or obligation, but by choice. Despite her understated beauty, Jenny's demure coolness inevitably translated into standoffishness, often preventing her from forming future alliances with admiring young men. She had suppressed her libido, she thought, as all good New Englanders should do. Her Puritan blood curdled, however, when mocked by some as the flawless all-American girl next door. Wade's watch vibrated, announcing the arrival of his ride to the airport. Jenny handed him his shoulder bag as he headed for the door. The bridge is yours, Jen. The desert awaits. Walking towards the elevator, Wade pressed his phone and placed it to his ear. Hello, Julia. Want to do some fashion shopping in an Egyptian souk? Chapter 3. The young belladonna's Italian flat was neatly adorned without being extravagantly furnished. An air of quiet refinement pervaded the place. There were fresh flowers on the table, pictures upon the walls. The hand of the domestic artist was visible throughout. What a pleasant home Julia Cartier had created for herself. Uncomfortable with elevators, her downtown Milan apartment was on the ground floor. It was spacious. She wanted space. Her slightly claustrophobic nature demanded it. She needed to breathe, like a honeybee trapped in a sealed glass jar. Julia had been happy in Montreal, where she was born and grew up. But to reach seventh heaven, she had needed to leave. Her drive required new highways, and she realized that she would have to help pave them herself. She was a young woman of uncommon originality and distinction. As a jet-set fashion designer, she was bold and dared to be different. Blessed with energy and good health, she had quickly established herself as a brand in one of the world's fashion capitals. Italy, a paradise of exiles, was now her home. Julia Cartier had become an Italiophile. Her intense work schedule left little room for socializing, friendships, and romance. Having been disappointed and burned by love on several occasions, she had been parked in neutral over the past year or so. Men were not a priority at this stage of her life. She declined their advances and offers, preferring to dine alone and walk the streets of her vibrant adopted hometown solo. Female friends were also few, almost non-existent, really. She was a bit of a loner. She preferred living out the final months of her 20s, totally immersed in her work and ambitions. Her only extracurricular activities involved a few exciting international adventures, shared with a lawyer investigator from New York, a strong, virile, handsome man that occupied more and more of her daydreaming time. They had first met in Milan, and over the past months shared time together in England and America. Her thoughts were of him as she prepared to settle into her comfortable bedroom for an early evening in the company of a timeless oldie flick. Lately, she had watched British television costume dramas like Upstairs, Downstairs and Downton Abbey. But this evening, she longed for old Hollywood. Although she liked the new generation of actors and movies, she loved everything about Hollywood's golden cinematic age. Cruising the choices offered by the silver screen's classic films menu on her pay service, she skipped over Roman Holiday, starring Gregory Peck, and one of her favorite actresses, Audrey Hepburn, having seen it many times. She passed by a Fellini masterpiece, a Bing Crosby and Bob Hope road movie, and a documentary on the Tinseltown gossip columnists Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons. She paused next to a 1960s blockbuster starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, Cleopatra, and pressed play. No sooner had the opening credits began to roll when her phone rang. It was her American friend, David Wade. Chapter 4. The Egyptian government plane carrying David Wade landed at Cairo International Airport after an uneventful 11-hour direct flight that brought him to the country's largest airport as the day began dawning. The horizon was tinged with red, and suddenly the sun appeared. Monday morning. Wade had spent most of the flight cogitating about his mission and worried every detail while the aircraft taxied towards a private terminal. Egypt's Ministry of Culture and Antiquities had hired him earlier the previous day to investigate the theft of a unique and valuable ancient Egyptian pendant. The precious item had just recently been excavated at an archaeological dig near the nation's capital, Cairo. The dig was co-sponsored by 3 countries, Egypt, Britain, and Germany. With so much to unearth in a country teeming with buried antiquities, foreign missions and researchers who wished to conduct work in Egypt were welcome, as long as the undertakings were approved, regulated, and supervised by officials of the ministry. Items found did not belong to the foreign diggers. They were kept in Egypt as national treasures, but the finders were given special exclusive examination and interpretation privileges, as well as first publication rights. Prestigious universities, including David Wade's own Ivy League alma mater, New York's Columbia University, regularly sent scientific teams along the Nile in the hopes of adding to their respective international reputations as locators of long-lost antiquities. In this particular case, the English-speaking nation involved was represented by England's University of London. Germany, however, was the guest nation in charge of the enterprise and thus the leader of this excavation. German academics were the ones who had identified and instigated the project, and then invited the UK institution to join in, after convincing the Egyptian powers that be of the pertinence of their proposed venture. The person behind this scheme and driving the project was a distinguished graduate and special attaché of Heidelberg University. As leader and site supervisor, this reputed German archaeologist was responsible for everything that occurred at the dig, including any theft of precious objects. It was also this person that had adamantly encouraged the host nation to contact and hire David Wade, for she knew him well and insisted on bringing in the American investigator for his unmatched skills in such matters. The other parties involved had no objection. They well knew the New Yorker's internationally stellar reputation. Arriving at the ministry offices, Wade disembarked the government vehicle provided for him at the airport and strode towards the entrance of the imperious neoclassical edifice. Upon entering the building's opulent lobby, he was greeted by the project's leader, Denary's Tristan Valkyrie. Chapter 5. Jazira is an island in the Nile River, in central Cairo, west of downtown and Tahrir Square, connected with the riverbanks through 3 bridges. During the latter part of the 19th century, when Egypt was under the influence of European colonial powers, the island was called Jardin des Plantes, or Garden of Plants, because of its great collection of exotic flora shipped from all over the world. Encompassing the northern portion of the island is the affluent district of Zamalek, where several government buildings house various bureaucratic departments, including the Ministry of Culture and Antiquities. Wade and Tristan no longer stood in the foyer, having entered an anteroom on the ground floor of the grandiose state building. The small chamber was richly decorated with moss-green moiré carpet, emerald plush velvet curtains, and crystal-laden lighting. Waiting for them were 2 ebonized walnut empire red upholstered side chairs, elegantly mounted with gilt cast bronze adornments and cabriole legs. Although not dressed in formal attire, Wade wore a smart business jacket that made him feel somewhat comfortable in the luxurious surroundings. Tristan, on the other hand, appeared pasty, haggard, disheveled, and unclean, as if she had left the dig site, trowel in hand, and gone directly to meet him. Her physical appearance did not bother Wade. He knew the reasons behind it. He also knew why the normally alert woman seemed dazed, confused, her face strongly stamped with grief. Tragedy had befallen her, and he was there to help. The story Wade had so far pieced together from various sources now required confirmation, clarification, and elaboration by Tristan herself. He shared all he knew with her in the hope that she could shed more light on the matter. Yesterday, an ancient Egyptian pendant from the New Kingdom period was excavated by a member of Tristan's team. The artifact, made of electrum, had been examined by her and the group of specialists she had assembled, then sent for cleaning, photographing, cataloging, before being brought back to her tent. The item then mysteriously disappeared, presumably stolen. Wade looked at Tristan and noticed that her dimpled chin was quivering. Her creamy blue eyes were welling up. With her face gone soft and hair falling over her shoulders, she looked at him and slowly began confirming the details of the find and theft. At one point, she seemed to run out of words and, gesturing silently, moved one palm over the other, trying to explain what he already knew. Her eyes filled, and finally they sat there looking at each other. Wade gave her what assurances he could, hoping to ease her mind. They stood up, held each other for a long moment, and went out towards the atrium's grand staircase. Wade cleared his throat and took a deep breath, fully resolved to help Tristan find 2 missing unique and priceless treasures: the electrum pendant and her 11-year-old son. Chapter 6. Julia Cartier checked into the Citadel Hotel. Upon arrival at Cairo International Airport, located in Heliopolis, 9 miles northeast of the capital, she had slid into her luxury convertible rental and had driven to the historic district within the old walled city and around the impressive citadel of Cairo. Characterized by hundreds of mosques, tombs, madrasas, mansions, caravanserais, and medieval fortifications dating from the Islamic era founding of Cairo, the delimited area was a splendid showcase of Arab architecture. There, she had followed Wade's instructions to settle into her suite next to his at a posh boutique hotel. Now, she waited for his call. Julia had enjoyed flying business class with Egyptair and had been fortunate, on short notice, to secure the last available seat. A few hours later, she was in another country, on another continent, a stranger in a strange land. As her own boss, Julia was able to take a few days for herself whenever she deemed appropriate. She was accustomed to last-minute travel and handled it well. Anyway, travel did not prevent her from getting work done online. She traveled light, one small carry-on bag with all that was needed. When visiting Muslim countries, she always made sure to pack a selection of modest clothes. Shorts and skirts were out of the question. She also packed very little makeup, only the basic of basics. Although ancient Egyptian women went heavy on the face paint and introduced eye makeup and wigs to the world, modern women in this nation were much more reserved. She was, however, mildly disappointed to discover that she had forgotten to pack her favorite sun hat in the rush of her travels. "Oh well," she told herself, "I'll have to go and buy myself a new one, with my friend." Julia's phone rang, displaying his name on the screen. "Hi, Julia. Arrived safe and sound?" "All is fine, David, and the hotel room is lovely." "Good." He enjoyed hearing her speak. Her French accent was mild and pleasant to the ears. "Any problems getting away?" "No, but I seldom take time off, except when you drag me into your little capers," she answered, smiling into the receiver. "When can I see you?" "Soon," he answered, lingering on the word, distracted. "I gotta go into a meeting, Julia. I'll call you when I get out and tell you where we'll rendezvous." The call ended. Julia caressed her phone, pleased she would soon reunite with her friend. She was anxious to see him up close again and to learn of the reasons why they were in Egypt and how she could be of help. Chapter 7. Atop the ministry building's grand staircase, Tristan steered Wade into a large rectangular room, even more lavish than the antechamber they had just left. Closing the door, she guided him towards the far end of the long oval table and invited him, with pointed finger, to sit opposite her. Not long thereafter, 2 older men and one 40-something woman entered. Tristan introduced Wade to Dr. Hazi Sawa, Egypt's flamboyant Minister of Culture and Antiquities. British Egyptologist Tom Parker, representing the University of London, and Officer Hypatia, attaché to the Egyptian National Police, the ENP. "Thank you for traveling to Cairo and accepting to help us in this matter, Mr. Wade." Wade nodded to the minister. "The stolen artifact is a unique and priceless World Heritage treasure, and it goes without saying that the boy is a unique and priceless treasure." The minister turned towards Tristan, "especially to his mother." The scruffy, downtrodden archaeologist did not react, staring down at her dirty fingernails. "The loss of both treasures is very embarrassing to the Egyptian state," Sawa resumed. "This unfortunate situation needs resolving without delay, and I will do my utmost to assist you in that task." Wade was a bit taken aback by the coolness of Sawa's statement. Equating a little boy with an object seemed a bit crass. Officer Hypatia addressed him next. Disfigured by a large and unattractive birthmark on her cheek, she was not a handsome woman. Short, stocky, and lacking curves in the right places, she wasted no time with primping, nor with formalities. "Have you been properly appraised of the situation?" she asked in a controlled accent. "Yes, I have," said Wade. "Earlier today in New York, then by phone with Minister Sawa, and just now by Tristan," glancing across at his Denary acolyte. The people present did not know Tristan as a member of Wade's group of specialists. They knew her as the representative of the German archaeological team and the on-site project leader. "What do you make of all this, Mr. Wade?" asked the minister, with his hands held together. "The pendant is perhaps the key to getting the boy back," Wade responded, "so I need to learn more about its significance." With the confidence and intonation of a well-born upper-class aristocrat, Britain's Tom Parker finally spoke his first words. "This is where I can help you, Mr. Wade, and to do so properly, we need to visit the National Museum." "I agree," said Tristan nervously, looking straight at Wade. "Go to the museum with Tom while I return back to the dig site with Officer Hypatia. We can all meet up at the site later." Wade nodded. Standing up, the minister hunched his body forward, arms arched like a gunslinger, with a hand-on-hip stance. He concluded the meeting by trundling to the door and opening it. The occupants immediately acknowledged and responded to his actions by filing out the room and heading their separate ways. Descending the grand staircase, Wade sent a text to Julia asking her to meet him at the museum entrance. He reunited with Tom Parker in the foyer, and they both headed out the front doors. Parker hailed a cab. "Have you ever been to the museum, Mr. Wade?" "I cannot say that I have, and you can call me David, if I can call you Tom." The Brit nodded haughtily. As they prepared to enter a taxi, Tristan and Officer Hypatia rushed out the main entrance towards them, calling their names. The four quickly congregated on the sidewalk next to the cab as Tristan showed them her phone screen, displaying an ominous text. "I have your boy. You have the pendant. Time to exchange. Now." Chapter 8. Cairo's Museum of Egyptian Antiquities, known to the world as the Egyptian Museum, contains many important pieces of ancient Egyptian history and houses the world's most extensive collection of pharaonic antiquities. Established in 1835, the objects were transferred in 1902 to the current building at Tahrir Square, which is the first purpose-built museum edifice in the world. Designed in the neoclassical style, the two-story Egyptian museum accommodates over 100 halls filled with artifacts covering 5,000 years of Egypt's past. The museum boasts approximately 165,000 objects dating from the prehistoric through the Roman periods, with the majority of the collection focused on the pharaonic era. The ground floor takes the visitor on a chronological tour through the collections, while the objects on the upper level are grouped according to category or tomb. Displayed on the upper floor are also many of the New Kingdom royal mummies, including the Bible's Ramses the Great. Despite its massive collection, museum curators and high government representatives have battled with foreign entities for the return of ancient Egyptian treasures scattered around the world. Their political and diplomatic campaigns to retrieve priceless antiquities of Egypt's cultural heritage from distant lands has sometimes met with success, but most often has not. Egyptian officials are after objects that they assert were stolen, smuggled, or once transferred as gifts. The process of repatriating historical artifacts is complicated by inadequate local and international laws. Also, many museums and collectors maintain that they acquired their artifacts legally and in a transparent manner. Determining whether an archaeological item has even been stolen requires delicate cooperation between government, law enforcement, museums, and antiquities dealers. And frequently, there are gaps in the historical records. For example, Egypt has been seeking to repatriate the Rosetta Stone, the slab of black granodiorite with an inscription that was the key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics. It was taken out of Egypt in 1799 during the period of French colonial rule by Napoleon's French Expeditionary Army and is now at the British Museum in London. Upon arriving at the Cairo Museum, Tom Parker headed directly inside to prepare for the visit, while Wade stayed out front to meet Julia, certain that his practiced eye would recognize her from a distance. When he had first called Julia from New York, inviting her to meet him, His mission had been straightforward: help find a missing artifact. It was only later that he had learned of the boy's disappearance. Had he known about the changed nature of the case, he would not have asked her to join him. Missing items were one thing, kidnapping was another. Although he knew he would appreciate her presence, he nevertheless now worried for her safety. Looking out across the front grounds of the museum, Wade noticed a familiar woman rounding the elliptical walkway. As she approached, his eyes confirmed that it was Julia. Everything glamorous, comely, elegant, fragrant, feminine, clever, and forbidden was his dear friend Julia Cartier. She seemed the model of physical perfection. Tall and shapely, with high cheekbones, a creamy complexion, large dark eyes, and long thick hair. She walked with a natural grace and wore a slight smile that seemed to acknowledge her beauty. She was always conscious of her appearance, but did not thrive on proximate attention, preferring to be admired from a distance. She wore conservative, though stylish pants, a light blouse, and a long, wide scarf wrapped around her neck, ready to use as a head cover when appropriate. Her choice of attire indicated to Wade that she had come well prepared for travel in this part of the world. She skipped her final steps towards him and lunged into his open arms. He could smell a mild perfume about her. The kiss was a bit awkward, but the welcome was not. "Glad you could make it, sweetheart," Wade half whispered into her ear. "Well, I've never been to Egypt, and I know you hate to drive." She pulled back slightly and smiled as if inviting him to agree. Her hair was different, straight and slicked back. He liked the new svelte coiffure. He liked it very much. Wade quickly brought Julia up to speed on their reason for being in Egypt. She was intrigued by the first part of his explanation regarding the missing ancient artifact, but distraught when told about the boy. Tom Parker reappeared alongside Wade and gallantly smiled at his companion, waiting for an introduction. Wade obliged. "Is that Cartier as in the seafarer or the diamond merchant?" Parker asked. "Who knows?" she answered flippantly with a shrug of her shoulders. Julia shook the Englishman's hand and assured him that she would try to stay out of the way. Parker teasingly remarked that with such beauty, he hoped she would not remain too invisible. "So, my dear, you are from Canada?" She gave him a nod. "Ah, the land of Anne of Green Gables." Julia gladly acknowledged the literary and cultural reference with another nod. "Are we ready?" asked Parker. This time, they both nodded. "Okay then, let's go in and meet King Tut." Chapter 9. A second message came in from the kidnapper. It was immediately sent to Wade. A photo. A disturbing photo of Tristan's boy with eyes open, bound, gagged, and lying within what appeared to be a pharaonic coffin. This second message, like the first, was deemed untraceable by the ENP. The accompanying text stated that the boy was alive and unharmed. Once again, the transfer of the pendant was made the condition for his release, thereby reconfirming that the kidnapper most surely had not stolen the item and did not know its whereabouts. Also, the message so far did not explain how or when the exchange should take place, but everyone assumed that information would arrive soon. While the police were fervently searching for the boy, Wade continued to judge that his time would be best spent locating the missing pendant, which in turn would give the authorities the item needed to secure the boy's release. The triumvirate left the marble entrance rotunda with its embellished floor tiles and descended into the lower level of the Egyptian Museum. Arriving at the bottom of the stairs, Parker announced, The missing pendant points us in several directions, and one of them is here." He took a few steps and stopped to address his companions further. "There is probably no more famous group of artifacts in the world than those associated with the discovery of young King Tutankhamun's tomb. Born in 1341 BC, he was an Egyptian pharaoh of the 18th dynasty who ruled from 1332 to 1323 BC, during the most glorious period of Egyptian history known as the New Kingdom. He has, since the discovery of his intact tomb, been referred to colloquially as King Tut. The 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun's nearly intact sealed underground mausoleum by British archaeologist and Egyptologist Howard Carter caused an international sensation and received worldwide press coverage. Parker removed a handkerchief from his coat pocket and wiped the corners of his mouth, then turned to his listeners with an air of superiority. "By the way," he declared with a class-conscious simper, "the expedition was sponsored by the English peer and aristocrat Lord Carnarvon." Parker led them to a nearby display case. The tomb's discovery sparked a renewed public interest in ancient Egypt, for which Tutankhamun's mask remains the popular symbol. Parker shut down, allowing his guests to view the iconic death mask without further explanations. Julia knew little about the Boy King, but she definitely recognized this object. It was dramatically beautiful, and its colors, texture, and image had greatly influenced the visual arts around the globe, including the fashion industry. They viewed several other items in the collection, accompanied by Parker's vivid recounting of the young monarch's short and turbulent reign, leading to an untimely death at the tender age of 18. "Here before us," Parker resumed, "is Tut's celebrated sarcophagus, and one of the 3 coffins laid within. Tutankhamun's sarcophagus is a box-like stone container that encloses not 1, but 3 coffins, nested one inside the other, in which to hold the body of the king. The outer 2 coffins are crafted in wood and covered in gold, with inlay of enamel, along with many semi-precious stones. The inner coffin, however, is made of solid gold and once housed the mummy of King Tut and his fabulous golden death mask. The image of the pharaoh on the coffin is that of a god shown in his divine form in the afterlife. The gods were thought to have bones of silver, hair of lapis lazuli, and skin of gold. Tut holds the crook and flail, symbols of pharaonic authority. 2 goddesses stretch their wings across his torso, with 2 more beneath, etched into the gold lid. "When Carter first came upon this coffin," Parker explained, "it was not the shiny golden image we see here today, for it was covered with a thick black pitch-like layer. This was surely an anointing liquid which had been poured over the coffin during the burial ceremony and in great quantity, perhaps 2 buckets full." Wade worked his phone to retrieve the photo sent by the kidnapper of the boy lying in the coffin. He compared it to the object displayed in front of him and gasped. "Look," showing the image on the screen to Julia and Parker. "It's the same!" he exclaimed while looking back and forth at the object and the screen. "Tristan's son is lying in an exact replica of King Tut's coffin." Chapter 10. Tom Parker was straight out of the Victorian age. At 60, he referred to himself bumptitiously as middle-aged. The bags under his eyes and downward crow's feet accentuated his long, pale face. He saw himself as the unquestioned arbiter of good taste for food, drink, and smokes. Whenever possible and permitted, he held a long-lit Benson & Hedges cigarette between his thin fingers, not positioned at the tip, where most smokers preferred, but instead tucked against the interdigital skin folds between the index and middle fingers. His right hand shook more than his left, a result of an old military injury sustained in Northern Ireland, causing the fire stick he enjoyed to jut up and down, sometimes propelling the ashes involuntarily onto the floor, while smoke snaked around his head. Smartly dressed in a tailored beige three-piece linen suit and white cotton shirt, loose-fitting around the collar, he wore his trousers a bit high. Sporting a slightly strange pigeon-toed gait, his students could usually hear him coming by the slap of laces in the handmade elevator shoes he imported from Italy to add a couple inches to his own natural-grown 5'7". The fancy footwear must have been uncomfortable. The laces were seldom tied. Back in England, he lived in old world style. Descendant of the landed gentry and thus independently wealthy, his academic colleagues considered him a model gentleman, if a tinge pompous. Younger, he spent his carpe diem years at England's best higher education institutions, and there was viewed by fellow students and faculty as dashing, handsome, charming, sophisticated, and more than a touch narcissistic. An aristocratic man characterized by an exquisite Selfridge's wardrobe from Oxford Street, impeccable taste, with respect and good manners towards the fairer sex. Conservative in nature, he was no libertine. Lord Byron, he was not. Having been married and widowed 3 times, he still considered himself somewhat of a fancy man. He found it difficult to ignore Julia's lithe and supple figure, but under the circumstances, he tried to. Face wrinkled with consternation, Parker glanced at the gold pocket watch that was attached to his vest with a slender gilded chain, then placing it to one side, retrieved a monocle from the other, and leaned in to view the photo of the boy and the coffin. Crikey! What a topsy-turvy world we've come to! Julia was shocked by the image, but remained silent. Let's go to the dig site, Wade announced. Wait, Parker said, grabbing Wade's bicep. Do you have the photos of the pendant on that thing? Wade nodded curtly and quickly retrieved 2 close-up photos of both sides of the pendant. Tom, you saw this amulet up close before it was stolen, right? Yes, I did, responded the professor. It was no larger than one of your American pennies. What do the images mean? Asked Julia, of both of them. Parker obliged. One side has an image of the sun disk, and the other a pharaonic cartouche. Julia waited, still not understanding. The sun disk represents the deified god Aten, praised as the creator, giver of life, and nurturing spirit of the world by one particular pharaoh of the new kingdom, who began a new controversial religion. And what about the cartouche? Julia asked as Wade slid his finger across the screen to make the second image reappear. In Egyptian hieroglyphics, a cartouche is an oval with a horizontal line at one end, indicating that the text enclosed is a royal name. Whose name? Julia persisted. The Englishman raised his head and put away his reading glass. The name of King Tut's father. Chapter 11. Akhenaten was an enigmatic pharaoh of the late 18th dynasty who ruled for almost 2 decades and died in the mid-1330s BC at the height of the New Kingdom's unparalleled peace and prosperity. He tried to reform Egypt's traditional religion by abandoning polytheism and introducing worship centered on one god, monotheism, the Aten sun disk. To pay homage to his chosen god, the innovative pharaoh changed his name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten. His reforms sent a shockwave throughout Egypt. The solar deity and shifts in religious culture were not widely embraced. After his death, his monuments were dismantled and hidden. His statues were destroyed, and his name excluded from the king lists, the official list of pharaohs. Traditional religious practice and worship of multiple gods was gradually restored, and when a decade later pharaohs without clear rights of succession from the 18th dynasty founded a new dynasty, they discredited Akhenaten, referring to him as a criminal and enemy in archival records. This short historical interlude was all but lost until the discovery during the 19th century of the site at Amarna, the capital city he built in Middle Egypt designed for the worship of the Aten. The trio returned to the ground floor of the museum and assembled in front of a stone demi-figure of the controversial pharaoh that had ushered in this revolutionary period in Egyptian history. Tom Parker pointed. "This is the father of King Tutankhamun." "Fascinating," Julia remarked. "I've never seen anything like this image in traditional Egyptian art." Parker smiled. "That's because Akhenaten's heretic reign introduced the new short-lived radical Amarna art style. Human images of that period are characterized by a sense of movement and activity, with figures overlapping and having raised heads, with many scenes busy and crowded. The human form is portrayed differently. Bodies, always shown in profile on reliefs, are slender of limb, swaying with exaggerated extremities, endowed with elongated skulls and excessive adiposity, with pendulous breasts and protruding stomach." The Brit placed his thumbs in his vest pockets and continued his discourse without checking to see if his small audience was even paying attention, as if enjoying the sound of his own voice. "In particular, depictions of Akhenaten, such as this one, give him distinctly feminine qualities such as large hips, prominent breasts, and a larger stomach and thighs." "Was this change in style to be more realistic or symbolic?" Julia queried the professor. "Ah, that is the question, my dear," giving her a pensive look. "Some scholars believe that the court sculptors were instructed to represent what they saw, the result being a naturalism and realism that breaks away from the rigid formality of earlier official depictions. Others think the opposite, describing this new art form as purely symbolic and ritualistic." "So, which is it?" Julia asked again. "I'm afraid the debate still rages on, my dear," bowing his head elegantly as if to conclude the matter. Wade appreciated the discussion, but was anxious to move on. A boy was missing, and time was of the essence. "What about her?" Wade asked, positioning his computer tablet against his chest and showing them the most famous bust in art history. Julia immediately recognized the iconic image and gave a half smile. Parker nodded. Yes, he extolled with rising excitement. "Yes, indeed. That beautiful woman is King Tut's mother." Chapter 12. The three museum-goers parted ways once outside the edifice. Tom Parker took his leave and headed back to the ministry by cab, while Julia hastily fetched her rental at the Tahrir Square underground car park. Wade sat on a stone bench provided for museum patrons. He fired off a missive to Denary's genealogist, André Barthélemy, asking him to study the sanguinary connections between Tutankhamun, his mother Queen Nefertiti, and his father Akhenaten. filial bonds were complicated and confusing in ancient pharaonic families. Wade wanted the matter clarified and the true relationships of these royals identified and explained. His next text was sent to Hewitt Fothergill, Denary's historian. Although not an Egyptologist, Hewitt was a distinguished professor at the University of Sheffield who had access to experts in ancient history and thus could prepare relevant materials for his Yankee superior. Denary, Latin for 10, had been assembled and led by Wade for efficacy purposes. His garrison of specialists allowed him to tackle any challenge. Membership in the group was by invitation only and regulated by strict rules and procedures. He paid his 10 lieutenants very well, and in return expected A+ competence, performance, precision, and discretion. David Wade was not the first among equals in Denary. He was the boss. Wade had purposely avoided the shade when choosing his seat near several freestanding ancient monuments placed in front of the red brick museum. He closed his eyes for a moment, lifted his head, and felt the sun take his face. He thought of King Tut's mother, replaying how Parker had described her, and reflecting on what he already knew about the famous woman. Queen Nefertiti was the great royal wife or chief consort of Akhenaten. With her husband, she reigned at the wealthiest slice of ancient Egyptian history, now called the Amarna period. She was made famous by her effigy, now in a German museum, considered notable for exemplifying the understanding ancient Egyptians had regarding realistic facial proportions. Made of a limestone core covered with painted stucco layers, this famous bust shows much less pronounced features of the then newly established Amarna art style. Nefertiti, her name meaning the beautiful one has come, in real life had been as remarkable as her statue. She had played a prominent role in public life and had been active in the religious and cultural changes initiated by her husband. They had stood together at the head of their new regime. Having lived during a highly unusual period in Egyptian history, she had skillfully navigated the religious controversies when the traditional gods of Egypt were abandoned by her and the divine royal family in favor of a single god, the life-giving sun disk named Aten. She had been a dedicated worshipper of the Aten and devoted wife. Towards the end of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti mostly disappeared from historical Egyptian records, but may actually have ruled briefly as co-regent alongside her husband, and later, after his death, as Queen Pharaoh under another name. And therein lied a deep mystery that Wade now wished to research, understand, and solve. The distinctive purring of a car engine brought him back to the moment. He opened his eyes to behold a modern Queen of the Nile riding in her golden chariot. The Queen jumped out of the vehicle and waved for him to join her. Julia Cartier had secured royal transportation, a gold Maserati, a little bit of her adoptive country to be driven throughout this ancient golden land. Chapter 13. Wow, David! I didn't think the pyramids were so close to Cairo. Julia kept one eye on the road while the other marveled at the sight. The pyramid complex of Giza is the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and the only one to remain largely intact. Located in Giza, a suburban area of Cairo, only a few miles from the city center, the 3 massive pyramids guarded by the Great Sphinx were built during the Old Kingdom, more than a millennium before King Tut arrived on the scene. As Wade began imparting to Julia his grasp of the long and complicated history that was ancient Egypt, he somehow felt weighed down by the centuries of time since the pyramids had been built. Almost 6,000 years ago, Julia, farming civilizations flourished in this northern part of the country, referred to as Lower Egypt. "Wait a minute," she interjected. "How can the north be known as lower?" The key to understanding this part of the world is the Nile River, which flows downstream from the south to the north into the Mediterranean Sea. The southern area is thus considered the upper part of the river, thus Upper Egypt. She nodded. Ancient Egyptian recorded history originated here in the north. That period is called the Old Kingdom. "But are we not interested in the New Kingdom?" she asked. "Yes, we are. But the capital city of the Old Kingdom remained active during the New Kingdom, which was centered further south." "Got it," she said confidently, pushing her lips together. "Is that where we are going? What was the name of that place?" "Memphis," he answered, waiting for a reaction. "You mean where the king of rock and roll lived?" She giggled. Wade smirked. Actually, Memphis, Tennessee was named after this ancient capital. "Live and learn," Julia said with satisfaction. "Live and learn." Anxious to receive news concerning Tristan's son, Wade reviewed his most recent incoming messages while Julia followed the many road signs to their destination, now only a few miles ahead. Wade activated the GPS on his device and helped Julia circumvent the small town of Giza to the ancient ruins of Memphis, where they came upon an active archaeological excavation site laden with tents, equipment, and workers. When Wade disembarked the car, he saw the project leader running towards him shouting, "I just got another message, David! I just got another one!" To better appreciate this novel's place in history, here is a rundown of ancient Egypt's historical periods. Pre-dynastic, 5500 to 3150 BC. Early dynastic period, 3150 to 2686 BC. Old Kingdom, 2686 to 2181 BC. First Intermediate Period, 2181 to 2055 BC. Middle Kingdom, 2055 to 1650 BC. Second Intermediate Period, 1650 to 1550 BC. New Kingdom, 1550 to 1069 BC. Third Intermediate and Late Period, 1069 to 332 BC. Greco-Roman Period, 332 BC to 641 AD. Chapter 14. Tears flowed from Tristan's eyes onto her cheeks as she showed Wade the message illuminated on her phone screen. The text was succinct. Prepare to exchange. The three-word message was superimposed over an image of the royal crook and flail insignia, symbol of the ancient Egyptian king's right to rule. The shepherd's crook stood for kingship, and the flail for the fertility of the land. Traditionally crossed over the chest when held, these paired objects represented ultimate power in that society. The only extant pharaonic examples of both the crook and flail come from King Tut's tomb. Their staffs are made up of sections of gold, dark blue glass, and obsidian upon a bronze core, while the flail's beads are made of gilded wood. Wade put his arm about Tristan's shoulder and slowly walked towards the work camp with Julia in tow. The site was a hive of activity, with a dozen or so laborers milling about amongst several ENP officers. Julia tried to decipher the different tongues being spoken by the members of this international team. She had mastered several European languages, including rudimentary German, but had never learned Arabic, the Semitic language of the Arabs. Officer Hypatia, seeing the newcomers in camp, approached. "I just got confirmation from our tech guys that this third message cannot be traced. It seems the kidnapper has used a different burner phone for each message." "What about the pendant?" Wade asked firmly. "No luck so far." Hypatia stopped, looked around, and then motioning to Wade, walked into a nearby tent. Pushing papers aside, Tristan sat on the cot, indicating that this was her cramped quarters. Hypatia sat near a field table while Wade and Julia remained standing. He could feel the vibrations of fear, anxiety, and apprehension throughout the tent. Officer Hypatia was cordial and respectful to Wade, who, as an outsider, was not always made to feel welcome by local or national police forces. He was well aware of the ENP's pride in being descendants of the world's first known police force, an ancient Egyptian invention in the field of personal security. He thus in no way wanted to intrude on their powers or jurisdiction. He was just there to help. Realizing that Julia was a stranger to the group, Wade quickly introduced her as his good friend, accompanying him on this mission. Both Tristan and Hypatia barely acknowledged her. "We have conducted a thorough search of this site and all of the living quarters and have found nothing." Recognizing that the tent canvas was thin, Hypatia gestured for caution and lowered her voice. "Have the workers been searched?" Wade asked the officer, imitating her quieter tone. "Yes, they have. My people examined their personal possessions and bodies." She shook her head. "Nothing." Wade continued firing off questions. "Are they all accounted for?" Officer Hypatia sighed. "No." "No?" Wade reacted strongly. Hypatia retrieved a half sheet of paper from her front chest pocket and unfolded it. "The expedition's 11 project workers are all accounted for, but every day the crew chief hires a few local day laborers to help with extra chores. These men are rarely the same, give only their names, and are paid cash at the end of each day's work. All but one of these itinerant workers were still at the site when the boy and pendant went missing." "Who was AWOL?" Wade interrupted to ask the obvious question. Hypatia stood and approached him with a paper in hand, pointing to a name. "This man." She looked up at Wade. "But we can assume he gave a false name." "Do you have a description?" "Not much." Hypatia returned to her chair. "He had never been hired before yesterday, and he kept mostly to himself." "So this man could either be the kidnapper or the thief," Wade surmised aloud. "That is what we think, Mr. Wade. That is where we are at." Wade turned his attention to Tristan, who sat stoically on the edge of her portable bed. "Why did it take a few hours to confirm that your son was missing?" Tristan arched her eyebrows, then spoke. "My boy often accompanied my crew chief to town for supplies. In all the confusion after the pendant was stolen, I was distracted and assumed he was safe with him, running errands. It was only when the crew chief returned alone that we realized he was missing. Gone." Wade rubbed his chin and cheek. "Did someone in the camp witness this crew chief leave the site alone, without your boy?" "Yes, it was confirmed. Anyway, my crew chief is a nice man, with a good reputation in his line of work. He has been working at dig sites for decades. His record is impeccable." Hypatia stood. "I am glad you have finally arrived, Mr. Wade, because I must now go back to Cairo. I will leave a few officers here on site, but my investigation team will now relocate to our headquarters in the city. We are confident that the pendant and the boy are not in this vicinity. Both have surely been moved elsewhere, but for now, unfortunately, we do not have an indication where. The female officer shook hands with the tent's occupants, then pushing aside the entrance flap, exited. Julia turned her gaze towards Tristan. She felt sadness and pity for the young mother. Although Julia had never heard of or met the woman, she sympathized and could only imagine the nightmare Tristan was living. Chapter 15. Tristan Valkyrie never pines nostalgically for the years spent as an academic at Germany's oldest university. She much prefers working as a hired gun in the private sector for corporations in the transportation, infrastructure, energy, and mineral sectors. Whenever companies encounter potential archaeological sites during digs, they are obligated in most countries to cease work and bring in professional archaeologists and historians to evaluate the site. Tristan Valkyrie is the first person most private developers contact to appraise nebulous conditions, and if need be, coordinate all dealings and efforts with local, regional, and/or national government agencies. Her work allows for travel throughout Germany and beyond. She is considered efficient, cost-effective, and respected by state and public heritage institutions. Working in the private domain gives her freedom and control of her schedule, influence in public policy, as well as earning power beyond college salaries and freedom from academic pressures to publish. Following in her father's footsteps, digging is in Tristan's blood. She joined Denary upon Wade's invitation some years ago, having worked closely with him on several jobs involving mutual clients. She liked everything she heard and knew about him, and he the same. Together, they are a duo to be reckoned with, and often bring each other onto their own respective jobs, including this one. Occasionally, Tristan accepts work representing her alma mater, as was the case when she agreed to head this project in Egypt. Although not an Egyptologist herself, she had meticulously gathered together an all-star dream team of impressive international experts for this venture. Navigating politics and leading multinational sponsored digs is Tristan's forte. What had initially looked like a smooth operation here on the outskirts of Cairo, however, had suddenly taken a turn for the tragic. Why are you digging so far north for Aten-related artifacts? Wade knelt close to Tristan, addressing her gently. According to inscriptions discovered in Memphis, Akhenaten founded a temple of Aten in the city. The burial chamber of a priest of this cult has also been uncovered at nearby Saqqara, a vast burial ground serving as the necropolis for the Old Kingdom's capital. The lack of sleep and severe stress were affecting the strength of her voice, but she continued using impeccable English, tinged with only a trace of German accent. When he became ruler, Tutankhamun faced an agonizing decision: to champion his father Akhenaten's ideals, or to steer Egypt back to normality and the mythologies of the past. Which side of the fence did he choose? Asked Julia. He opted for the latter, Tristan answered, expressionlessly. It was the beginning of one of the greatest political reversals in Egyptian history, and a return to the nation's complex religious system with its pantheon of gods embedded in political intrigue and skullduggery. When the Aten's glory days were over, Tut relocated the royal court from his father's new capital further south in Amarna to Memphis before the end of the second year of his short reign. Whilst in Memphis, Tutankhamun turned his back on his father's reforms and betrayed that vision and legacy. She paused, examined the dirt under her nails, then continued. The young pharaoh initiated a period of restoration of the temples and old polytheistic traditions following the monotheistic era of Atenism, which, as you may know, was regarded as heresy. My team's goal is to find concrete evidence regarding this ancient city's role during and after the great time of upheaval caused by the rise and fall of the Aten cult. Finding the pendant must have been exhilarating for you and your team, asked Wade. It was, nodding many times in agreement. It was, for a few hours. Tristan's voice finally broke as she stared blankly forward and returned to her private thoughts. Earlier in the day, she had sent her kisses on the wind, hoping the wind would touch her son's face. Wade stood and stepped back to Julia. What now, David? We're not finished here, he said after reflecting for a moment. I need to see more. I need to know more. Where is that pendant? He looked Julia straight in the eye with singularity of purpose, thinking only of Tristan's boy. I need to find that pendant. Chapter 16. Tristan methodically reenacted, for Wade's benefit, the journey taken by the pendant from beneath the earth to the camp wash basins, then to the examination, conservation, and photography tables, onto the portable X-ray and scanning machines, and finally to her tent, brought there by her esteemed colleague, Professor Tom Parker. Each step in the process had been meticulously recorded, and every stage was corroborated by members of her team. She herself had examined the artifact briefly when it reached her tent, then placed the item on her work table next to a magnifying glass, and left the tarp shelter for about 15 minutes to caucus with two of her scientists. When Tristan returned to her tent, the item was gone. It was at that moment the frantic search for the pendant began. Tell me about the boy, Tristan, Wade asked in a half voice. I knew you had a son, but you rarely spoke of him. Tristan took a deep breath and bit her lower lip. I never involved him in my career or the people I worked with. I kept him for my private life. Did you often bring him on jobs? Asking the question Julia hoped he would. She wished to understand why the young boy was not in school this time of year. No, Tristan responded, shaking her head and rubbing both hands across her face in frustration. No, this was the first time. She took a deep swallow and looked directly at Wade. My son has challenges, learning disabilities, severe developmental disorders. He has acute troubles with social interaction and communication. He can function, but his comportment is irregular and his symptoms ever-changing. Wade said nothing, but his expression of sympathy encouraged her to go on. He doesn't talk. He can, but just doesn't. He hasn't spoken in the last year. Nothing. Silence. His schooling was becoming a problem, so I took him out and brought him here, thinking it might help. You know, a change of pace and scenery. She winced, holding back tears. He is not a hellion. Quite the opposite. He is a good boy, a nice child. But just, well, different. Julia turned to Wade, but he did not meet her gaze, instead remaining focused on Tristan, who pulled out her tablet and began sharing photos of herself and her cute tow-headed son at various stages of his life. One photo stood out from the rest, showing Tristan sporting a Lady Di haircut that added another level to her beauty. I always keep a sharp eye on him, his whereabouts, but on that day, she caught herself. At that moment, she caught herself again. In the midst of the euphoria, exhilaration, and celebration, and then the commotion surrounding the theft, I Wade had heard enough. He brought her in close for a hug. Julia was glad he did so. "Oh, and by the way," gently pushing away from him to continue, "the boy is not really mine." Momentarily stunned, Julia and Wade froze. "He is my son, but not my biological child." Chapter 17. Wade felt his watch vibrate. He ignored its beckoning, guessing it was his Denary acolyte sending him the data he had requested earlier in the day. Julia offered Tristan a cup of cool water, which she accepted. Wade could see that his companion on this adventure felt odd, awkward, out of place. An intruder in a stranger's personal life, trials and tribulations. Julia was deeply sorry for Wade's German friend, but could not help sensing that she was being made privy to deeply private information that under normal circumstances would not be shared with her. Tristan finished her water, and feeling mildly refreshed, stood. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and solidly built, with a large bone structure, muscular in a feminine way. Hers was an athletic body, suited to sports, or in her case, digging. Her long, curvy hair, darker blonde than light brown, and distinctive facial features could please any man or woman. Her fair skin was lightly bronzed from prolonged exposure to the sun, while excavating under cloudless skies. For a fleeting moment, amidst the tensive mood, Tristan's pleasant physical appearance prompted Julia to wonder if Wade's female friends and work colleagues were all attractive. So far, every young woman she encountered when in his company was beautiful. Wade liked and respected Tristan, both as a premier member of Denary and as a long-standing colleague. Despite extensive vetting of each team member, he did not make it a habit to delve into certain areas of their personal lives. He was thus dumbfounded by Tristan's declaration about her son and waited for her to explain. "You see, David, my younger sister, that is, became pregnant at 16 and decided to keep the child. The birth was a difficult one, so difficult that, sadly, she died as a result of multiple complications. Although barely an adult myself, I stepped up and assumed full guardianship of the boy. I named him, took care of him, and eventually adopted him. It hasn't been easy going as a single mother, especially when the knowledge dawned gradually that the child was not like others. But I guess unconditional love triumphs all, even his heartbreaking diagnosis of autism." Wade was speechless. He tried to talk, but nothing came out. From the moment Tristan had held the boy securely in her arms and inhaled his baby smells, she was hooked and resolved to assume the maternal role seemingly cast upon her, without knowing exactly what lay ahead. "Being a parent is truly one of the greatest challenges I know of," she said with anguish in her thin thread of a voice. "To be responsible for another human being is an awesome thing." Tristan moved closer to Wade, her face strongly stamped with grief. "David, please find him. Please find my boy and bring him back to me, alive." Chapter 18. Winter sunset in Cairo was early on this day, 4:55 p.m. The urgency of the situation called for action. But what action? Before planning his next move, Wade needed to do some research, some thinking, and to converse with a few key Denary lieutenants. He planned to stay in the city and depart early in the morning before sunrise. His next destination was still a mystery to him, but he felt confident that following an intense brainstorming session and a lot of pacing, it would be revealed to him before twilight of the next day. Julia headed for the car, ready to drive off. Wade trailed behind a few steps, then felt the urge to go out into the desert to see if its quietness held the answers to his questions. He wished to better know the silence of the desert. He signaled his intentions to Julia, then wandered off for a while, the moonlight guiding his steps. He listened to the wind and felt the stones beneath his feet. The breeze was cool. The air pierced him. The desert nights were usually cold. During daytime, he liked the sun at his back, not in his eyes. At night, however, his vision was attracted to the planets and stars. In need of energy, he hung his head back, drinking in the night sky, the soul of the world surging within him, just as the universe travels through endless time. Rejuvenated, he walked back to camp and joined his friend, waiting in her car. Julia drove the unfamiliar streets into the city towards their hotel in total darkness. Unlike his favorite chauffeur, Wade had not yet checked in, but did so immediately upon arrival. She joined him at the lobby elevator after parking her car. She hoped they would get the chance to cruise the highway soon, very soon, allowing her to test the limits of her golden bullet on wheels. Wade took the elevator to the 3rd floor, but was perplexed when Julia declined the ride, saying she preferred the stairs. He didn't wait for her to join him in front of their adjoining rooms before entering his. Once inside, he threw his bag onto the king-size bed and grabbed the ice bucket. When he emerged, bucket in hand, Julia was unlocking her door. "Get some food and an early night, Julia. Shake off the jet lag. We've got a big day tomorrow and we start early." "I would have pulled an all-nighter behind the wheel if needed, David. You know that." "I know," he responded, nodding, "but I need to do some thinking." "Well, think fast," she commanded. "The clock is ticking. There is a precious life at stake." He nodded again. She smiled softly, then entered her suite and immediately called down for some nutrition to be sent up. Without definite scheduled meals, the days appeared shapeless to Julia. When traveling, she needed to be properly fueled, fortified to keep going. But it was after breakfast that her energy was at its highest. Ice bucket full, Wade plunged 2 bottles of ale from his room's minibar into the container, then ordered a plate of shish taouk from room service. Waiting for the food, he quickly showered and caught up on some essential personal grooming. Then, dressed in sweats, opened an ice-cold bottle and began to text. His first missive was to Officer Hypatia of the ENP, asking for an update on any new developments. She responded immediately that the nationwide search for the boy was intensifying, and that Tristan's text replies to the kidnapper's 3 messages had been blocked, undelivered, providing further evidence that each message had been sent by a different phone that was then immediately destroyed or rendered inoperative by the sender. Hypatia finished her text by asking Wade about his progress. He responded that he would most probably hit the road the next day to follow a hunch as to the whereabouts of the Electrum pendant, and would keep her closely informed of his activities. Wade began reviewing the detailed message sent earlier by Hewitt Fothergill regarding the tumultuous reigns of the Egyptian monarchs implicated in the present conundrum. Hewitt skillfully imparted what Wade called fusion history, a blend of various established viewpoints on a topic fused with counterpoints and Hewitt's personal analysis. The amalgam was perfect, as usual, and well appreciated by his Denary superior. Hewitt had a unique take on history and how it should be perceived, analyzed, and interpreted. Wade had often heard the professor pontificate on the topic, and occasionally reread his official published version. History is not black and white. Nothing is. Rainbow colors mixed with subtle shades of gray permeate and surround most events, occurrences, eras, and personal lives, so that in order to fully understand history, one must piece together a delicate puzzle of facts and impressions into a multicolored mosaic that is, at best, in focus. The degree of focus depends on the ability of the generation looking back to properly digest an enormous amount of information, covering a wide span of time. This premise surely applies to all eras. Historical periods should not be put into a vacuum and understood only via its epoch. Instead, it should be analyzed and viewed on a more comprehensive scale, and in the context of a generation or generations of time. Objectivity remains any historian's ultimate but purely unattainable goal. No matter how hard one tries, life's many experiences and influences inevitably and most often unconsciously lead all spectators, reporters, and historians towards undeniable and universally natural human subjective traits. With this in mind, one should nevertheless attempt in good faith to take it upon myself to explain events and attitudes as they were, and not as one might wish them to have been. Also, one should attempt to avoid the oversimplification of causes. Rarely is one event the direct or sole cause of another. Situations and occurrences usually arise due to a variety and multitude of reasons that uncover and give the best and fullest understanding of what happened. It is thus with this open-minded prism-like attitude that one should look and search for the multiple causes that led to the events at hand. Wade's food tray arrived just as he was about to open the second chilled bottle. He rapidly dispensed with the deliverer and began eating while viewing his tablet. He quickly sank deep into the complex genealogical web provided him by André Barthélemy. Egyptian monarchs and their immediate relatives regularly married within their clan to keep their blood pure and their family wealth. But unlike later European royalty, they did not only marry cousins. Egyptian kings and princes often married their own sisters or half-sisters, as did Tutankhamun. The most shocking revelation, however, was that King Tut had something in common with Tristan's boy. He too was not his mother's biological son. He too was adopted. Chapter 19. Southern California winter weather was not usually as hot as Egypt's, but it could be, and was, on this sunny mid-afternoon. James Felix was not frolicking on the beach, even though it was only a few steps from the modest oceanside bungalow he rented with 3 of his friends. He could afford the place without roommates, but he liked to share, and enjoyed the camaraderie. The narrow, rectangular domestic residence was no more than 20 feet wide, with rooms arranged one behind the other, and doors at either end of the house. The rear of the one-story building had no setback and was actually flush with a single paved lane. The mauve pastel structure was raised 2 feet off the ground. Concrete steps led down a small front porch to a very short yard enclosed by a low brick wall. Beyond the wall was sand, and eventually, hundreds of yards further away, the Pacific Ocean. Built in the 1960s, this shotgun shack was one of the few remaining low cottages on the beach, the many others having been torn down, the lots combined, and replaced by Malibu-style beach mansions. James's room, the largest in the house, was plastered with vintage posters paying homage to the music of the 20th century. His recent purchase of a lithograph of Rolling Stone magazine's first edition was displayed for all video callers to see in the background. His day's eclectic playlist so far included The Moody Blues, Irving Berlin, the Bay City Rollers, and Pink Floyd. It was now Patsy Cline's turn to accompany Denary's young scientist in his work. The next day had already begun in Egypt, when his boss's tag appeared on his main video screen announcing a call from Cairo. James Felix had installed a highly effective and precise tracking app on his employer's devices, allowing his chief to locate every Denary associate at all times. this being one of the key conditions every member had to accept upon entry. Although Wade had forbidden his scientists from keeping tabs on his movements, he accepted that his video call locations be identified by the blonde Cali inventor, who occasionally did so. "Hey dude, what's up?" "Hi Jim. I can't rap for long." "I'm all ears," the youth responded, drumming his fingers against the desk. "Electrum," Wade asked. "What about it?" "Shake it down for me." "Electrum? Okay. Firstly, I like. It's cool." James added a thumbs up. "Secondly, it's an alloy, an alchemist's dream." Wade waited for his young gearhead to continue. "Go on." "Well, electrum is a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, with trace amounts of copper and other metals. It has also been produced artificially and used for jewelry, especially in ancient times." "Is there an Egyptian connection?" "Yeah, of course. Electrum was extensively used as early as the 3rd millennium BC, during Egypt's Old Kingdom, on a variety of objects. The ancient alchemists loved the stuff." "Anything else?" "That's the short of it. But I can prepare you something more detailed, pronto." "Please do." Wade was about to sign off but added one last instruction. "Make sure to look into the metal's supposed magical, religious, ceremonial, and mythical properties and uses." "Okay, fine, my fearless leader." Wade smiled, then challenged his Denary inventor and innovator to name a great Egyptian scientist. He knew the young man hero-worshipped great minds, and Wade liked to test his knowledge. "Ali Mustafa Masharafa." "Who?" Wade asked. Chapter 19, Part 2. "Ali Mustafa Masharafa," James repeated proudly. "He was an Egyptian theoretical physicist at Cairo University. He contributed to the development of the quantum theory, as well as the theory of relativity. Einstein called him a genius." "Oh, well, in that case, I should have known about him," Wade chuckled. "Speaking of genius, thanks for the ring. Nice." He brought his hand up to the screen and presented the finger that wore the custom-made smart ring James had designed and recently sent Wade. More advanced than anything yet on the market, this wearable electronics device with advanced components combined features of mobile devices with cutting-edge innovative functions useful for handheld use, including a gesture-based controller, allowing one to perform a variety of actions with a simple motion of the hand. Wade's ring could communicate directly with his phone, tablet, or personal computers. He was already using it in New York to make disbursements when near a payment terminal, unlocking an electronic lock, or controlling appliances and machines when making gestures in his office or at home. "You're too kind, El Presidente, you're too kind. Oh, and remember, when all your other devices lose signal, it won't." "Never?" Wade asked incredulously. "Never," James confirmed. "Well, almost never." Wade shook his head and smiled, then gave a two-fingered salute, closed off the conversation, and went back to work. Time slipped forward. It was almost 2 hours past midnight when he lifted his head to meet the silence. Quiet. A profound, comforting quiet. Wade sat back for a moment and reflected. His mind wandered. Disengaged, he slowly drifted away from his tablet. His eyes sluggishly went from full to half-mast to sleep. Suddenly, the room phone rang out, much too loud for Wade, his ears being sensitive to such intrusions. David, I cannot sleep. He could hear her breathe. I am so sad. Wade stood up to help regain full alertness after involuntarily dozing off for a few seconds. I'm sorry I invited you into this mess, Julia. But when I did, it was all about a missing piece of ancient jewelry, the pendant. I know, David, I know. She paused, and he let her. I am glad to be here with you. I really am. But meeting Tristan today and her son, it's so sad. I understand, sweetheart, but try not to be. We must focus on the difficult task at hand. I know, and you are right, but I cannot sleep. I'm tired, but I just cannot sleep. Try watching a boring movie, he suggested with a soft chuckle. I tried, but it did not work. The film turned out to be great. This time, she too dared to laugh. Have you had time to do what you do? Yes, I have, he answered in a more sober tone. And I'm still not finished. What is our next move? Where to next? We're going to follow the pendant's story and see where it leads. What do you mean? We need to find that pendant for the exchange, and I intend to do so. Then why not leave now? You can continue your work in the car. We are not going to get any sleep here anyway. Wade thought a moment, then agreed. All right then, let's head south to the home of Aten. It's time we came face to face with Egypt's sun god. Chapter 20. 3 a.m. sharp. Departure time. Cairo was still sleeping as Julia drove her sporty rental top down, out front, while Wade took care of checkout details and was permitted to grab a few fig muffins, a coffee for Julia, and pomegranate juice for himself from the hotel restaurant's continental breakfast spread, yet to be laid out. Where to, David? South. That's it? South? She protested. Follow the Nile, driver, follow the Nile. He grinned teasingly. She sighed, then accompanied him with a grin of her own. Once out of the city limits and beyond the suburbs, they joined Egypt's section of the Trans-African Highway going south along the Nile River. This pan-continental road stretches the length of Africa. They soon found themselves on a patch of road surrounded by desert on both sides. Wade inserted his custom-fitted earplugs to block out the noise created by the convertible's charge against the airflow, and as a subtle signal to Julia that he wished to concentrate and not be disturbed for a while. She saw his actions and understood. Anyway, she didn't mind. She loved to drive and planned to enjoy zipping along this modern desert road. Wade prepared detailed missives with attached photos for 3 Denary confederates. Mariko Shimada, Denary's Tokyo-based auctioneer, appraiser, and authenticator of historical objects, was charged with evaluating the pendant's international sales value, potential, and possibilities. Youthful, sophisticated, and charming, her skills, expertise, and reliability made her one of Wade's most valuable assets. London's Nancy Burnell, Wade's banking expert, whose mother harked from this part of the world, just south of Egypt, in Kenya, was assigned the task of determining how such an item could be purchased using world financial networks, legitimate or clandestine. Ms. Burnell, with her ebony eyelashes and golden complexion, was as beautiful and elegant as a Nubian princess and as smart and cunning as any empress of the kingdom of Kush, a long-standing rival to ancient Egypt's empire. Sasha Kirov, Denary's secretive and mysterious intelligence operative stationed in Russia, was asked by Wade to investigate Minister Sawa, Professor Tom Parker, and Officer Hypatia. Sasha was the only member of Denary that worked strictly on the basis of written exchanges. Having never met or spoken to Sasha Kirov, Wade knew little about Denary's intelligence expert, other than that Sasha was indispensable to him. Wade didn't bother telling any of them that he expected results ASAP. They knew every request was ASAP. Denary rules were basic. Members must always be available, work diligently, never go beyond their mandate, and remain focused, loyal, and precise. In other words, never be wrong. Get the job done. Start fast, finish strong. Each member of Denary was only ever in contact with its leader, David Wade, and did not know the identity of the other members of the club. Although they were not exclusive to Denary, participants were required to be available 24/7. Members never fully understood the complete picture or extent of its leader's projects or undertakings. Their tasks, however, were always unambiguous and succinct. Wade provided them with the info they needed, nothing more. He never felt comfortable divulging the totality of a situation to anyone in Denary. This policy gave him ultimate control over its activities. He kept his people in the loop, but only with the information each specifically required to get their part of the job done. This guiding principle had served David Wade well. Denary associates were generously compensated for their valuable services, but never got public credit for their contributions. Several hours on the lonely dark highway had passed. The morning sun was beginning to yawn. Having completed his work for the time being, Wade put his device away and turned to his faithful driver, thereby announcing that he was open to conversation. Julia immediately seized the opportunity to ask him about an obscure term she had encountered since her arrival: the Levant. Her co-pilot nodded, signaling that it was a good question. He explained that the Levant is an approximate historical geographical term referring to a large area in the eastern Mediterranean, including Egypt. In its widest historical sense, the Levant encompasses all of the countries along the eastern Mediterranean shores. A European term to describe this region of the world, Levant, means rising, implying the rising of the sun in the east. The Levant has been described as the crossroads of Western Asia, the Eastern Mediterranean, Northeast Africa, and the northwest of the Arabian Plate. The populations of the Levant, referred to as Levantines, share not only the geographic position, but cuisine, some customs, and a very long history. "What is that, David?" she interrupted, leaning onto the steering wheel towards the car's front window. "It looks like a cloud of some kind," he guessed, trying to decipher the nature of the huge veil of caramel particles heading towards them. Suddenly, the golden dawn's rising sun was blotted out, and the air became contaminated with dust. Julia fumbled a few seconds for the switch to raise the convertible roof. Once their cover was securely in place, they began hearing the contact of hundreds, then thousands, then millions of minuscule grains against the windows. Visibility was drastically diminished, and the car began to sway. They were in the midst of a violent sandstorm. Chapter 21. Julia was driving blind. The sky was filling with sand. It was worse than a storm at sea. The wind screamed, trying in vain to penetrate the car's outer shell. Wade kept his cool and refrained from shouting instructions, preferring to let Julia's sharp driving instincts react to the dire situation. she skillfully brought her Maserati to a halt on the highway embankment. A swirling swarm of microscopic projectiles crashed into the rocking vehicle's skin and pelted the rooftop. The noise was so loud that their voices could hardly be heard by one another. Wade reinserted his earplugs for protection, while Julia checked the signal on her cell. Nothing. They had driven straight into a whirlwind of danger and would now have to wait it out, in silence. Julia reached for Wade's knee just as the storm began to dissipate. The heavy haze and swerving cocktail of powder, dirt, sand, and dust disappeared as rapidly as it had enveloped them, but the strong winds remained. With the dust cloud gone and the worst of the storm having passed, the hazard was now mostly behind them, the blinding dust having settled a bit. Julia removed herself from the vehicle and circled her scarred desert chariot, wiping sand off chrome, while lamenting its pitiful condition, the windstorm having sandblasted its exposed casing. Wade joined her for an outside examination of the roadster. Other than frayed nerves and some superficial damage to the sports car's exterior, no serious harm had befallen them. It soon became obvious, however, that the next challenge facing their road trip would be the powerful airstream, still blowing strong and carrying specks of debris, though nowhere near the onslaught they had just experienced. The pair re-engaged the road against 60-mile-per-hour winds and fought their way southward along a highway strewn with sand, like the aftermath of a Canadian snowstorm. The desert was without windbreaks, forcing Julia to steer at a slight angle to counteract the gusts. Wade recalled his grandfather once saying, "The desert is a capricious lady that sometimes drives men crazy." He could finally relate to that statement. As soon as they neared their destination, however, conditions improved. The light, the river, the mountains, the desert, the hot sunny weather brought with them a clear state of mind. Here in the midst of the tall date palm trees and high desert scrub, their highway troubles would slowly drift away. Wade turned his mind back to business and their purpose for visiting this location. He pointed to the exit he wanted Julia to take, and she did. They abandoned the service way for lesser paths that seemed to lead nowhere. The stark landscape surrounding them was utterly devoid of any sign of civilization, until they neared an extensive Egyptian archaeological site that represented the remains of the capital city newly established and built by the pharaoh Akhenaten and abandoned shortly after his death. Presently known as Amarna, the ancient name for this huge religious and political center was Akhenaten, meaning horizon of the Aten. This was the city that King Tut's father had founded and built to honor and worship the Creator, giver of life, and nurturing spirit of the world. Chapter 22, Part 1. Good morning, Mr. Wade. I've been expecting you. Hazi Sawa, Minister of Culture and Antiquities, greeted the weary travelers with open arms as they approached the remains of Akhenaten's once glorious purpose-built capital. The high government official was accompanied by a security detail of 4 armed men. Wade had been made aware that the minister would be present at the site this morning, but was surprised to be greeted by him at such an early hour. In Cairo, Sawa had worn a modern Occidental business suit. In the desert, however, he was dressed in a thobe, an ankle-length traditional Arab garment with long sleeves, similar to a robe, kaftan, or tunic. A surwal or pajama is typically donned underneath. Crowning his costume was a white gutra headdress kept in place by a black cord agal, worn doubled. Julia admired the neatly pressed garb and appreciated its functionality against the raging sun. Noticing the attention his Muslim outfit was attracting, Sawa smiled, gestured affably, and said, "Egypt was once part of the empire of the Prophet. Praise be his name." Minister Sawa was a short man who appeared much larger on account of his erect bearing, broad chest, and thick neck. He had a copper-colored complexion, a broad nose, swoosh eyebrows topping dark eyes that flashed with humor and vitality. His head was covered by thick white hair, unevenly streaked with the original black. When he smiled, his entire face was transformed, radiating enthusiasm and friendliness. His ebullient nature, however, was easily doused when discussing serious archaeology. "Very nice to meet you again, Minister." Wade shook his hand and introduced Julia. "Let me show you around," the minister offered. "Perhaps being here will help you advance the search for our two precious items." "Anything new on that score?" asked Wade. "Sadly, no," he responded, shaking his head, with what appeared to be sincere distress emanating from his face. "Rest assured, Mr. Wade, my government is devoting all available resources to this matter. But as you know, when the kidnapper announces his readiness to exchange, we must possess the ransom. We need to retrieve that pendant." Wade, with arms tightly folded, nodded in total agreement. "Now, let us begin." Sawa took 2 steps, then stopped and turned to Julia. "I am pleased to see that you have covered your delicate skin, madam. The sun is harsh, and getting harsher by the minute." To protect herself from the sun's rays, Julia had a white, long-sleeved shirt rolled down, sunglasses, loose jeans, and a light shawl covering her head and shading her face. When exposed to these conditions, soon, no sun upon skin can be tolerated. Wade had also chosen his attire strategically. He did not want to spend the day burned, whacked, and parched. He knew that desert heat, real heat, is a creature all its own. Unlike New York's sweltering August humidity, which makes you want to strip down and make a run for the ocean, desert heat and sun make you want to cover up completely. Located just inland on the east bank of the Nile, the ruins of the city are laid out roughly north to south. A moonscape, with virtually nothing evident on the surface. It was here, on a flat, barren, lifeless stretch of desert, that Akhenaten carried out his most extravagant and seemingly illogical act. Amarna, one of the most ambitious construction projects in ancient history, had been built in record time. A city of almost unprecedented scale. It had sprawled over a huge swath of the desert plain. There had been sparkling new palaces with banners streaming and statues of the pharaoh along the wide streets. Suburbs had housed the court officials who commuted to work on the royal road that ran through the center of town, probably the widest street in the ancient world. It had been designed for chariot processions, with Akhenaten leading the parade. At its height, the city's population topped 10,000 souls. There had been traders, artisans, boatmen, priests, soldiers, bureaucrats, and their families. In its finished state, Amarna had offered a theatrical setting for celebrating Akhenaten's kingship. Chapter 22, Part 2. Looking out onto the site, the minister described the scene in a clear, booming voice that belonged in the theater. Akhenaten is, for many Egyptians, something of a hero, a revolutionary with a distinct religious vision. In his lifetime, however, he was loathed and resented by many as a megalomaniac, a renegade despot, a troublemaker, even a madman. Shortly after claiming the throne, Akhenaten declared the god Aten, represented by the sun, was the only true god. Sawa paused, checked his phone. whispered something to one of his men, and continued. Throughout his rule, King Akhenaten tried to change many aspects of Egyptian culture to celebrate, venerate, and praise his one and only God. He was throwing out the old ways and forging a new path. He moved the royal capital to this untouched virgin site, and upon the desert floor erected a number of great palaces and special temples here to start anew. A clean slate for his ambitious dream, his incredible experiment. The whole city was one great stage on which Pharaoh could demonstrate his devotion to the Aten. "Is this where the Nefertiti bust was found?" asked Julia. "Yes, it was. A German archaeological team discovered the bust in 1912 in the sculptor Thutmose's workshop, buried beneath the sands. Modern interest in Akhenaten and his remarkable queen Nefertiti comes partly from the unique style and high quality of that bust, and the new style of pictorial arts they patronized, a hallmark of the Amarna period. Unlike many of the famous temples of Upper Egypt, little is preserved of the once massive Amarna temple, only its foundations. They passed through its pylon gateway and found a large reconstructed altar upon which the rebel pharaoh would offer food to the Aten. Then, as the trio continued along the central axis of the temple, the remains of many columns came into sight. Reclaimed by the environment and slowly baked by the scorching sun, these pillars once stood at the rear of the temple in the sanctuary area. Today, however, only one singular orphaned column still stands, forlornly and solitarily poking its pinnacle in the direction of its long-ignored solar deity. Continuing to act the tour guide, the minister swept the mostly desolate landscape with his arms and pointed towards various designated areas. After almost 2 decades of rule, Akhenaten died, and his new regime quickly fell apart. This bold, holy city had been his utopia, but not everyone was happy. Following his death, conservative forces, led by the army of temple priests, reimposed the old religion. This once great and beautiful capital gradually crumbled back into the sand, abandoned for all time. Branded a heretic with radical beliefs, traces of his monuments elsewhere were defaced. A turbulent and traumatic episode in Egyptian history was over. The old order and traditions were resumed, and every instance of Akhenaten's name and image was purged, swept away. The minister paused for a moment to lubricate his vocal cords with a sip of water from a plastic bottle handed to him by a member of the security foursome. Wade and Julia, having also been given bottles, quenched their thirst. "As you can see, my friends," again sweeping his burly arms across the panorama, "the pharaoh's personal paradise was dismantled, piece by piece, leaving only its bare foundations. The city lay dormant and faded away. Left without care, it had been abandoned, sunk beneath the soil, extinguished. Amarna became a ghost town, disappearing with time and the shifting sands." The minister dramatically sighed and placed his hand on his hips, continuing to scan the ruins. Then he concluded with an uplift in his voice. "Ironically, despite the attacks and destructive efforts of the ancient Egyptians, Akhenaten is today one of Egypt's most famous kings. His monotheistic vision lives on. His ideas didn't die, for the vision of one true God resurfaced a few centuries later in the revelations of a prophet named Moses, who led his people out of Egypt to the Promised Land. A sense of spiritual joy seemed to inhabit the man's face as he continued. The single God of Moses has been the bedrock of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths ever since. Akhenaten's own religious experiment may have turned to dust, but the dream of a holy city for the one true God never faded. It continued to haunt the minds of visionaries and fanatics through the ages, right down to the present day. Chapter 22, Part 3. The major attraction at Amarna are the private tombs of the royals, privileged nobles, powerful courtiers, priests and officials who were forced to move to this city in the middle of nowhere and abandon their traditional beliefs in order to continue their official duties and careers. Many of the major tombs are decorated and adorned with their occupant's name. Some are small and unfinished, others modest and unassuming. Each seems to reflect the personality and patronage of the original owner. The tombs lie up a steep, long slope and are cut into the hills, cliffs, and bluffs to the east of the capital. The small group, now led by a tomb custodian, followed the rock-lined path to the top of the cliff, then along the ridge as the custodian slowly opened the burial places one by one. Waiting for the tombs to be unlocked and their heavy metal gates to be swung open, Wade walked to the edge of the escarpment and looked out over the desolate archaeological site. In the distance, across the remote desert plain, was farmland, followed by the sparkling river, the golden sand, lush green fields, and blue water starkly contrasting with one another as they vanished towards the horizon. They entered 4 of the decorated rock-hewn tombs. Many were left unfinished when the city was abandoned. Throughout each burial vault, unusual reliefs of the king's life and royal family in unprecedented intimate and relaxed poses dominated the walls. Julia, uncomfortable within enclosed spaces, distracted herself with the fine artwork executed in the unique, exaggerated usage of the period, a style she was now readily able to recognize. Beautiful, just beautiful, Julia remarked in a nervous voice. It is so nice to meet someone who truly admires our national treasures, Sawa commented to her with a wide smile. They next visited the tomb of the reviled and controversial king himself, which lay down an empty and quiet valley. Quiet except for the wind that rumbled past their ears as they stood in the shade of the surrounding cliffs anchoring the Amarna plain. Descending into the dim-lit passageway, they walked down the long straight axis of the tomb. Feeling the walls close in, Julia reached for Wade and took several deep breaths, but said nothing. It quickly became obvious to the visitors that the decoration had everywhere been vandalized by those wishing to tear Akhenaten from the pages of history, leaving only fragmentary remains behind, such as a curious sun disk whose long arms reach down from the heavens to give the world radiant life, bathed in the goodness of its rays. Faces and name cartouches had been chiseled out and Akhenaten's tomb ransacked. Even his sarcophagus was smashed to pieces and left scattered in his burial chamber. Rocking back and forth on his heels, his hand rubbing the back of his neck, Wade regarded the scene with intensity, trying to fathom a deeper meaning. Noticing the American in deep thought, Sawa offered one of his own. When contemplating the mysteries of ancient Egypt, Mr. Wade, one finds a veil sometimes better left undisturbed. Time erodes beauty, but cannot diminish the wonderful workings of the mind. Upon exiting Akhenaten's tomb, the minister concluded the tour with one last poignant remark. As you have witnessed, my friends, unlike his legacy, Akhenaten's final resting place has been completely decimated. Chapter 23. The air was dry and thin as it rushed over him on the banks of the river. Wade could feel its clarity sharpen his thoughts and fine-tune his emotions. Nature can be sanity-inducing, he remembered his grandfather telling him. And here, he could feel the cradle of civilization's great natural spirits and the culture's bountiful hands visiting upon him in the wilderness. He removed a khaki bandana from his wrist and soaked it completely in the cool waters of the Nile. He offered it to Julia, who, although hot and tired, waved it off. Wade refreshed his face and neck with the drenched handkerchief that wiped the dust off. With the desert breeze acting like nature's laundromat dryer, seconds later he was dry as a bone. Egypt is a land where desolation and endless desert give way to a narrow strip where water flows and life takes hold. From these beginnings sprang the wonders of a flourishing Egyptian society that would last for millennia. The sacred and powerful Nile has been the lifeline of civilization in Egypt since the Stone Age, with most of the population and cities of Egypt resting in the Nile Valley. And nearly all the cultural and historical sites of ancient Egypt are found along its riverbanks. Regarded as the longest river in the world, the Nile is an international waterway as its drainage basin covers 11 countries, with Egypt being considered the gift of the Nile. An unending source of sustenance providing 3 good crops per annum, it played a crucial role in feeding its people. Silt deposits from the Nile made the surrounding land fertile because the river overflowed its banks annually. The ancient Egyptians cultivated and traded produce around the Nile. Wheat was a crucial crop in the famine-plagued outer region. This trading system secured Egypt's diplomatic relationships with other nations and contributed to economic stability. As Wade gazed back over the water, he was struck by its color. During this annual season of the inundation, known as Akhenaten, the river rises and sometimes takes on a scarlet hue, caused by red-colored silt that churns in the water during the flooding season. Wade was familiar with this phenomenon and the modern scientific explanations for the occurrence, but the sight nevertheless brought something to mind, and Julia noticed. "What are you thinking of, David?" He did not respond, overwhelmed by the recollection of the biblical first plague in which the waters of this great river turned to blood. Chapter 24. The minister and his 2 guests decided to part ways, he going back to Cairo and Wade instructing his dependable chauffeur to head into Upper Egypt. The highway became a shimmering mirage as they drove in 105-degree heat. With each dip in the road, Julia struggled to maintain her focus on the long black strip of pavement occupied by dancing visions. Why would someone go to such extreme lengths to secure this particular object? What was its significance? What was so important about the electrum pendant, and why would someone kidnap an innocent child to secure it? Wade kept asking himself these fundamental questions, like a Greek chorus looping in his mind. Was it being done just for money, or to add prestige to a private collection? Or is there something else, another possible motive I am missing? The written response received from Denary's auctioneer, Mariko Shimada, made it clear that this, now notorious pendant, could not be sold to any respectable museum, but could certainly be peddled off into any one of the many shady private collections. As for financial transactions involving such clandestine collectors, Denary's financial specialist, Nancy Burnell, assured Wade that offshore tax haven accounts were easily set up around the world for these types of illegal black market dealings. Finally, Wade analyzed the reports sent by his intel source, Sasha Kirov. Exhaustive background research revealed that Minister Hazi Sawa, prior to becoming a politician, had been a career academic with fervent nationalistic stances regarding foreign archaeological interventions in his country. As a young student, he had participated in many violent disturbances and protests in support of his views. Professor Tom Parker, on the other hand, apparently had no qualms whatsoever with British extraction of cultural treasures from its colonies, arguing that many of the treasures would have been lost, damaged, or destroyed during times of political unrest, civil disorder, and wars had it not been for his countrymen's perspicacity. Interesting. Wade ruminated on all he had read. Very, very interesting. One report, yet to come, was on Officer Hypatia. Having no choice but to wait, Denary's leader was nonetheless anxious to make sure the female officer in charge of investigating this affair held a high reputation and was, indeed, without reproach. Wade's thoughts now returned to the banks of the Nile. Sifting through his annotated and highlighted case notes, he searched for and quickly found several passages he wished to reread and fully digest. He was forming a diagram in his mind, a chart, an incomplete puzzle, in need of the missing pieces. Having momentarily finished his readings, Wade turned his head, not towards his cute driver, but to the side window and the barren desert scrolling past. His brow creased as his brain put forward a number of theories, some revisionist in nature, about ancient Egypt and the origins of Western spirituality and faith. Was Christianity actually an ancient Egyptian religion? Chapter 25. How old are you, David? 33. L'âge du Christ. What? L'âge du Christ. Repeating, more for her own sake than his. It is French for the age of Christ, referring to Jesus' age when he was crucified and killed. Wade looked at her with a baffled expression, wondering to himself, where did that come from? Julia volunteered an explanation without being asked. It was a common expression I heard all the time when I was growing up in Montreal. All my relatives were Catholic and used many unique words and phrases that became part of the French-Canadian language. Julia was comfortable with his age. 4 years older than I. Perfect. Just as it should be. They had met only a few months ago, but had since shared 3 exciting adventures together. She liked him. She liked him a lot. Julia knew she was his friend, his new, special friend. But what exactly did that mean? 6 feet plus David Wade, with his handsome face, great smile, easy laugh, and natural athletic ability, was a young man of duty, honor, and great responsibility. Appearances counted. He doggedly strove to keep himself as fit and well-groomed as possible. Confident but unpretentious, he spoke of himself without embroidery, preferring that others extol his achievements and virtues. His mental and physical prowess had enabled him to develop a charismatic presence that brought him to the front ranks of investigators. Julia knew he was a detective and attorney, but had yet to wholly understand his true specialism. His enthusiasm, energy, and good judgment, mixed with a dash of panache, made her know why he was, in her eyes, a man to be reckoned with. Contemplative silence permeated the car's inner sanctum. Julia remained focused, steering steadily onwards. Wade lowered his seat back, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath, slowly drifting to another level, a different plane, an intellectual trance. Reposed, he began addressing the modern hypothesis of a few fringe scholars and authors whose positions are in conflict with mainstream Egyptology, including conventional Egyptian chronology. These mavericks argue that Judaism and Christianity did not originate in Judea, but is the remnant of an ancient Egyptian mystery cult that was suppressed and transformed by the Roman authorities. Proponents of this theory identify the Semitic-born Egyptian official Joseph from the Bible's Book of Genesis and Broadway's amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat musical, with a known New Kingdom Egyptian official, and assert the identification of Hebrew liberator Moses with the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. It is also claimed that Moses and Akhenaten were the same person, supporting this belief by interpreting aspects of biblical and Egyptian history. Exponents allege that Atenism can be considered monotheistic and related to Judaism. Other connections include the comparable words of the Great Hymn to the Aten, written by Akhenaten with the Old Testament's Psalm 104, and a ban on idol worship and the similarity of the name Aten to the Hebrew word meaning Lord. This would mesh with their other claim that Akhenaten's maternal grandfather was the same person as the biblical Joseph. Advocates also argue that Jesus was not Jewish, but was actually the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, and that there was no biblical Joshua, just a confusion between the names Joshua and Jesus. They claim that up to the 16th century, when the Old Testament books were translated from the Hebrew text into modern European languages, Jesus was the name of the prophet who succeeded Moses as leader of the Israelites in Egypt, not Joshua. Since the 1500s, two names were employed, Jesus and Joshua, which confused people into the belief that they were two different characters. Most Egyptologists and critics reject these theories as non-academic conjecture, not worth refuting. They claim its blatant reinterpretation of the true historical record treats the evidence cavalierly. Furthermore, believers in this fanciful narrative present themselves as sober historians, yet when it suits them, the biblical evidence is accepted at face value and literally, but when the biblical evidence does not suit them, it is handily discarded or distorted. The revisionists, on the other hand, state that the reason mainstream Egyptologists and professional scholars from related disciplines do not accept these ideas is because they have established their careers on conventional interpretations, and that to accept other, newer theories could diminish their academic authority. In historiography, the term historical revisionism usually means challenging the orthodox views held by scholars about a historical period, or introducing new evidence, integrating new facts, or of restating the decisions and motivations of the participant people. The revision of the historical record reflects the new discoveries of fact, evidence, motive, and interpretation, which produce a revised history. In certain controversial cases, revisionism involves a reinterpretation of the moral meaning of the historical record and reversal of older moral findings and judgments in which right becomes wrong, and the virtuous heroes, good guys, or positive forces are depicted as sinful villains, bad guys, or negative forces. At a basic level, historical revisionism is a common and continuing dialogue between the present and the past, and the less controversial process of developing and refining the writing of history. Wade opened his eyes. Could these controversial theories be true? And if so, do they offer some vital connection to the missing pendant? Chapter 26. Still waiting. Wade shared his watch's face with Julia. These two passive words comprised the terse response from Tristan to his inquiry for news, an update, anything. The boy and the pendant remained at large, missing. They had rolled into Upper Egypt, grabbed a quick bite to eat along the Nile, and then drove to the ancient monumental city of Thebes, whose ruins lie within the modern city of Luxor. The site of Thebes includes areas on both the sunrise eastern bank of the Nile, where the colossal temples and statues stand and the city proper was situated, and the sunset western bank, where a necropolis of large royal and private cemeteries and funerary complexes can be found. The egos of the pharaohs were embedded in this great metropolis. Thebes was the venerated capital of Egypt and a revered religious cult epicenter, mainly during the Middle and New Kingdoms. The city is mentioned in the Bible, and Moses' nemesis, Ramses the Great of the 19th dynasty, was one of its many pharaonic builders. Parking their dusty desert wagon on the east side of the river, Julia and Wade walked towards the Karnak temple complex in the heart of Thebes. Comprising a vast mix of decayed temples, chapels, pylons, and other buildings, the major complex is a vast open-air museum, one of the largest ancient religious sites in the world, and the second most visited historical site in Egypt, after the pyramids. Of special interest to Wade was the deliberately desecrated and dismantled temple that Akhenaten had constructed on the site prior to establishing his new religion and moving the capital from Thebes to Amarna, halfway between the ancient capitals of Luxor and Memphis. Akhenaten's temple was thoroughly demolished immediately after his death. Despite being one of the most carefully investigated archaeological sites in the world, the exact location of Akhenaten's temple at Karnak is still uncertain, with its full extent and layout unknown. The Sun Pharaoh had scorned the old gods of Thebes, to the consternation of the priests, who influenced the nation where the service of the gods permeated everyday life. Akhenaten had attempted to overcome the powerful priesthood who had gained control over Egypt before his reign. The priesthood of Karnak regained their powerful position as soon as the nonconformist king died and religious power moved back to Thebes. They had been appalled by the prominence given to Akhenaten's solar symbolism and were instrumental in extinguishing the archives and destroying many records of the anarchic pharaoh's existence. Wade stood, shoulders squared, letting the monumentality, the immense grandeur, and majestic architecture saturate him. He wished to soak it all in and channel the past, feel history's presence. By now, Julia understood Wade's cognitive process and respected his methods, odd as she thought them. The American sleuth marveled at how Akhenaten had rocked Egypt to the very clay of its foundation and pushed the empire in a provocative new direction, turning Egyptian worship into chaos. The dissident king had rejected old mythologies and, for a time, broken the back of the religious theocracy, thus allowing him to consolidate pharaonic power. Moving on to equally impressive Luxor Temple, the other primary cult shrine on the east bank, the pair walked along an amazing causeway connecting the temples and focused on the ram sphinx statues that lined the long avenue on each side. Once inside, they admired the stone obelisks the complex had to offer, as well as the parts of the sanctuary built at Tutankhamun's command. Luxor Temple may have been where many of the kings of Egypt were anointed and where Alexander the Great claimed he was crowned as Egypt's new conquering pharaoh. Wade nodded to himself that it was time to move on. "Seen enough?" Julia asked, interpreting his body language. Yep, he confirmed. Let's jump the river. Oh, by the way, I've asked someone you know to join us. Julia scrunched her face in bemusement, then scanned the immediate vicinity. Approaching them from a distance was a silhouette, partially obscured by the blinding afternoon sun. Moving closer, the apparition took form. Unable to contain herself, Julia smirked at the familiar sight of a red-headed vixen. Chapter 27. The trio crossed the Nile in separate vehicles. Wade joined Firebird in her Jeep, while Julia followed close behind in her Maserati. Every time she saw the flaming beauty, Julia was more and more intrigued by Wade's enigmatic art expert. Firebird was a one-woman, red-haired Irish revolution. Curvaceous and sexually attractive, this seductive queen of hearts was smart, tough, yet sensitive. The redhead had always been in demand with the boys. As a teenager, she had had many admirers and had been a tough dance card. Raising the young Carrot Top on her own, her father, a pug-faced bruiser, was Irish to the bone, a Joycean figure off the streets of Dublin. He was a character driven to do the wrong thing, but did not. He instinctively refused to add to the violence in the world around him. With great difficulty, and against his own grain, he transcended his circumstances and found the strength and grace to save himself and the part of the world he touched, including his precious daughter. Arriving at the reserved staff car park area, the brainy beauty had her connections. The three congregated next to the Jeep. Julia took a fresh look at the femme fatale whose remarkable physical appearance was quite impressive. Tall and gorgeous, with eyes as blue as the cloudless African sky, Firebird resembled a sexy, sultry cartoon character topped by a long mane of naturally bright fire-red hair. Usually decked out in leather, exposing a dive bomber bra, Egypt's heat begged for a respite in her usual style. Opting for a lighter fabric, her white Egyptian cotton jumpsuit hugged her curves as if it had been painted on. Her take-no-prisoner high heels had been abandoned on this day for white strappy buckled gladiator sandals, rivaling Julia's laced-up black booties for combined fashion and desert comfort. The threesome walked a slow curving pathway towards their destination, sunglasses on. The wind began to pick up, bringing with it the smell of the desert and the sweat of animals. Julia began to feel its force against the side of her face. She had always felt a bit jealous of the freedom of the wind, and today was no exception. They still had a long way to go, climbing a stone ramp which elevated them momentarily over the desert floor. Looking out across the bleak sands before descending into the valley, Julia noticed a faraway tent structure with animal stalls penning up a variety of horses and camels for hire. The silhouette of the huge white canvas and surrounding makeshift fences made for an oasis, a place of refuge, neutral territory. Following ancient laws of hospitality, ready to welcome weary travelers and trade caravans. Surrounded by date palms, the oasis offered shade and water, relief from the hardness of the desert climate. The encampment was flanked by dunes, providing windbreaks for the camel drivers and trail guides to go about their chores relatively gust-free. An outdoor fire was burning, and she noticed the sweet smell of its smoke. Julia suddenly felt a rush of serenity, tranquility, and contentment. She stopped and savored the moment, letting her companions walk ahead without her. Ever since the sandstorm, she was intrigued by the wind. It came from no place at all, nor did it go to any place. It seemed to blow across the world without a birthplace, and with nowhere to die. She wished to experience the language without words, the universal language of nature and the desert. Immersed in silence, Julia drifted. The desert was endless, she could see only a part of it. She looked out at the horizon, trying to foreshadow what was just across it. There were mountains in the distance, and there were dunes, rocks, plants, and things that insisted on living where survival seemed impossible. The wind began to blow stronger, lifting the desert sands and bringing the sounds of the oasis to her. Distant camel groans and horse whinnies broke the quietude as their odor became a bit more tolerable. A few unrestrained horses raced off pell-mell into the desert. One of the horses reared, raising a cloud of dust. Despite not having ridden much, Julia's favorite animal was the horse. She reflected on the few times she had tentatively ridden horses as a teenage girl. Her astrological sign being Sagittarius, the half-human and half-horse centaur of mythology, had encouraged her to admire these mammals for their strength, grace, nobility, and beauty. As for camels, she had never ridden a one-humped Arabian camel like the ones she presently examined from afar, or any other type of camel for that matter. She had heard that, unlike horses, they were horrible creatures that did not like people. As a child, however, one of her favorite storybook series described the adventures of a friendly, smart, and curious Egyptian dromedary named Camelus. Descending the slope to rejoin her companions and walking towards the entrance of the low area between the hills, she smiled, saying to herself, "How strange Africa is! How magnificently strange!" During their ride over to the valley, Firebird had explained to Wade that she had flown in 3 days earlier with a client who wanted an extensive on-site course amongst the great achievements of ancient Egypt. He wanted her to advise him on upcoming auction purchases of rare and valuable objects originally unearthed in this area. Wade's Denary tracking app had alerted him that his racy art historian, curator, and restorer was in the region. He had texted Firebird about meeting up. She agreed, knowing her client would be held up in his hotel suite conducting long-distance business for a few hours, thus permitting her to spend some downtime with Wade. Flanked by two of his favorite females, Wade thrust deeper into the legendary valley, its air current carrying the girls' dueling perfumes. Julia was astonished at the vista which slowly revealed itself with every step forward. Firebird, a frequent traveler to these parts, was familiar with the panorama, but far from jaded. Chiseled out of the rock was the world's greatest mausoleum. They advanced, inexorably drawn to the spectacular and atmospheric wadi of ancient Egyptian monarchs, the Valley of the Kings. Chapter 28. Firebird walked slightly ahead of Julia and Wade. Watching this young, voluptuous female move was quite an experience. She was all woman. Wade didn't take notice, however, instead preoccupied by the other magnificent sights the local environment had to offer. Having shared company with Wade and Firebird a few times prior to this meeting, Julia sensed a pattern regarding Firebird. Even though Wade had a front row ticket, he was not paying any attention to the show. For a period of 500 years spanning the New Kingdom, ritual burials were performed in the Valley of the Kings, and stone-cut tombs were excavated here for the pharaohs and powerful nobles. The valley stands within the heart of the Theban necropolis, city of the dead. The royal tombs are decorated with scenes from Egyptian mythology and give clues as to the beliefs and funerary rituals of the period. Almost all of the tombs seem to have been opened and robbed in antiquity, but they still give an idea of the power and opulence of the pharaohs. This area has been a focus of archaeological and Egyptological exploration since the end of the 1700s, and its tombs and burials continue to stimulate research and interest. In modern times, the valley has become famous for its rumors of the curse of the pharaohs and the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. Exploration, excavation, and conservation continue in the valley, which is one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. Although at ease walking the grounds of this impressive rock valley, Julia was apprehensive about entering any of its constrained tunnels and tombs. Arriving at the entrance of their target burial chamber, once camouflaged by the infertile desert, Julia stopped and grabbed Wade's forearm. Firebird obliviously continued advancing without them. Julia hesitated, then nervously whispered into Wade's ear, "I am not going in there." "Why not?" Wade reacted, only half whispering. "I don't like tight spaces." "I never knew that," he said, surprised at her revelation. "Well, now you do," she responded, embarrassed. "Since when?" he inquired innocently. "Since forever." Her forcefully whispered outburst was now filled less with embarrassment and more with displeasure and frustration. "You just never took notice." Wade observed his friend assume restrained panic mode, the stress tightening her facial muscles. Realizing she had left her companions behind, Firebird turned and moved a few steps back towards them. "Are you ready to enter King Tut's tomb? Beware of the curse," she dramatically warned, teasingly. "Oh, and did you know that his original name was not Tutankhamun? Before he changed it, the birth name given to him by his father was Tutankhaten, meaning living image of Aten." Chapter 29. Here lie the mummified remains of the boy pharaoh, the son of King Akhenaten. Julia clung to Wade's arm, finding it difficult to concentrate on their red-headed tour guide's vivid descriptions. Julia was instead greatly preoccupied by the dimensions and solidity of the chamber's walls and ceiling. Wade had convinced his partner to enter the tomb with an assurance that he would stay by her side. Firebird commented on the scene in a low voice while they stood deep inside the ancient underground burial place, only a few feet away from an ornate sarcophagus containing a royal coffin and the human remains of King Tut. As you surely know, Tut's biological mother was not Queen Nefertiti, King Akhenaten's great royal wife, his principal wife. Tutankhamun's actual blood mother was his father's sister, who was one of the king's many lesser or minor wives and concubines. Referred to as the Younger Lady, her real name is unknown to history, but her remains have been found and positively identified. Mummies sometimes cause nausea in some onlookers, but not to Wade. The only thing that made him queasy was the sight of blood. Julia felt boxed in, preoccupied by every aspect of the enclosure's dimensions. Her thoughts turned back to the winds. Oblivious to Julia's qualms, Firebird pressed on. He inherited the throne at a young age. His reign was short-lived, and he most probably died a violent death, perhaps murdered, if the interpretation of his mummy's recent examinations is to be believed. Following his mysterious death, he quickly faded into the sands of Egypt, only to be resurrected by the astonishing discovery of his intact and undisturbed tomb. "What about the curse?" Julia asked, hoping to distract herself from her underground predicament. "King Tut's curse?" Firebird smirked. "The mysterious deaths of a few of those who excavated Tutankhamun's tomb has been popularly attributed to a curse put onto those who dared violate any pharaoh's final resting place. Do you believe it? Probing the erudite redhead, half-jokingly. Firebird didn't dignify Julia's question with an answer. Instead, looking her straight in the eyes, then abruptly turning away with a swing of ginger hair. Wade chuckled, then transferred his attention to the signal emanating from his ring, announcing that a message was trying to download but was being impeded by lack of signal strength. "Excuse me, ladies." He began exiting the tomb. "I need to take this," shouting as he rounded the dimly illuminated corridor. Julia felt abandoned. She moved closer to Firebird, matching each of her steps towards the exit. Emerging into the bright light, Wade's eyes took a moment to adjust, enough time to allow his watch to display a text and photo on its tiny surface. Needing more screen surface, he extracted his phone from his side pocket to view the missive. A second, but slightly different photo of Tristan's boy, eyes wide open, still bound and laying in Tut's coffin. A new message was tagged to the image. "Exchange boy for pendant at Library of Alexandria in 2 hours. Stand by for exact location to be relayed in next message. No police, or boy dies." Chapter 30. Wade shared the dire message with Julia, then showed it to Firebird, while giving the art expert a quick summary and relevant details of the situation. Upon arriving in Egypt, Firebird had seen the media coverage of the kidnapping, but did not know that Wade had been brought in. His involvement, however, did not surprise her in the least. The tall redhead positioned a small earpiece, took a few steps, turning her back for privacy, and began working her phone. After 2 short conversations, she turned to Wade, suggesting that he and Julia could be flown directly to Alexandria on her client's chartered airplane. "Take our plane, David. The pilot says he can get you there in 90 minutes. He's already taxiing onto the private runway of Luxor International Airport. Once in Alexandria, however, you're on your own. But at least it will get you there, fast. I'll make sure Julia's rental is taken care of." Wade did not bother with the details on how Firebird was able to arrange this for him. He had somehow expected it. The Trinity ran back to their vehicles, assumed the same seating arrangements as before, and drove in close proximity to the airport. Along the way, Wade's sixth sense told him that there was something different about the most recent message and photo sent by the kidnapper, prompting him to forward the picture and text to Denary's computer and tech whiz. If anyone could detect an anomaly within this data, Wade was convinced it would be teenager Rajiv Mohandas. Chapter 31. The aircraft was not exactly what Wade thought it would be. It was a jet plane, but it was an old jet plane. This very light entry-level Cessna was known in its heyday as a microjet, a category of small business jets seating 4 passengers, considered the lightest business jets approved for single-pilot operation. "Thanks for putting this together, Red." "No problem, Blondie." "Also, thank your client for his generosity, but tell him to invoice the expense to the Egyptian government. They are covering all my travel costs." "Don't worry, he will. He's not generous." Making a face. "Despite his millions, he's a bit of a Scrooge." "Ah," Julia muttered under her breath. "He is a séraphin." "What did you say?" asked Wade. "A real miser." She translated without further explaining that Séraphin Poudrier is Canada's notoriously rich, skinflint literary character, the ultimate wealthy penny pincher. The ministry will also take care of your car expenses, Julia, including a new paint job. He grinned at her, and she reluctantly responded in kind while handing the keys to Firebird, who detected an inside joke or anecdote, but let it be. Hands were shaken. Then Wade and Julia embarked the plane, nodding to the already seated pilot, and buckled in. Seconds later, the jet was moving, positioning itself on the runway for takeoff. The interior was old-school plush, a bit ragged, having seen better days. Julia began wiping her arm and headrest with a disposable sanitizer cloth she had extracted from one of her pockets. This was not the first time Wade had noticed her germ-phobic behavior, but as before, he did not mention it. During acceleration on the runway, the plane jounced about, skipping across the tarmac several times before gathering the speed to get airborne. The two passengers had not yet begun to distract or busy themselves with the usual on-flight leisure and work activities, preferring instead to direct their complete attention to the plane's performance and mentally willing it to succeed. The hope that a bumpy takeoff strip was the cause for the plane's dismal performance so far, and not its own mechanical limitations, were dashed once the jet left the ground. The ascension was as uncomfortable and uncertain as the liftoff. Wade was accustomed to clocking air miles in comfortable, intimate private jets, and therefore could compare. This was intimate, but not comfortable. The noise emanating from this vintage machine was loud, very loud, especially for Wade. He had already inserted his earplugs, but nevertheless had to cope with a noise sensory overload, meters running into the red. Julia, on the other hand, dealt with the decibels as most normal folks do. It was annoying, but not a major bother. She was not aware of her companion's severe auditory affliction. She assumed he used the plugs to enhance his concentration. Wade vowed to tell her about his peculiar hearing challenges and sensitivities. But not today. Not now. The next hour in the air went by relatively well, allowing both passengers to re-engage with their devices. With only a few minutes of flying time remaining until descent and landing, Wade's hearing continued to suffer from the plane's relentless cacophony, when suddenly the noise disappeared. It had ceased, vanished. The harmonic dissonance was gone. He removed the silicone from his ear canals and looked at Julia. She was deep inside her tablet and didn't notice any change. "Do you hear that, Julia?" She raised her head and looked at him, perplexed. "Hear what?" "That's just it," he responded. "I don't know what you mean, David. I hear nothing." Wade looked out the side window. "The engines have stopped." Chapter 32. Wade was sure the plane's motors had stopped functioning. Although the aircraft continued to fly, it no longer soared. This became apparent to Julia when she noticed a downward angle, a dip in the craft's flight trajectory. Wade bounded from his seat to the cockpit door, opened it, and witnessed a panic-stricken pilot repeatedly attempting to restart the engines. The man did not notice or look back at Wade. He frantically repeated the simple reignition steps on the instrument panel, but got no response. He suddenly strayed from his unsuccessful routine and appeared to try something different. Then his head suddenly fell forward. Wade watched this happen and deduced that the man was unconscious. But if so, how could this be? His whole body was twitching. "Julia, come quick!" He unbuckled the pilot and pulled him out of his seat onto the floor. A line of blood had streamed from the man's nose to color his lips. Wade balked at the sight. "What happened?" "Get him out of here." Julia grabbed the small man under the arms and dragged him to the aircraft cabin next to her seat. "You take care of him. I'll take care of the plane." "You can fly?" I used to. He closed the thin cockpit door, placing an opaque barrier between himself and the bloody vision, and sat in the empty control seat. Julia chose not to move the pilot any further. He was still twitching uncontrollably. She placed a nearby pillow under his head, loosened his tie and top shirt button, and scurried for a cool, wet towel and bottle of water. Wade tried to re-engage the engines but got no reaction. He knew that planes equipped with jet engines fly at greater altitudes than propeller-driven aircraft. Private passenger jets are usually assigned a cruising altitude of up to 39,000 feet. He recognized that this might allow him enough time to stabilize the plane's descent and glide onto one of the many runways offered by the Alexandria airport, which he could see off in the distance. Julia swung the flight deck door open and shouted, "What's happening?" I got it! It might not be a smooth landing, but we're gonna land." Julia nervously handled her phone, trying to alert anyone about their predicament. "I will, try and, reach the airport. Reach the airport for emergency help." "Good girl," Wade said in his best calm and reassuring voice. "But do it sitting down, buckled in, and make sure the pilot is restrained. This could get rough." Julia took her seat, having already securely immobilized the pilot despite his ongoing convulsions. Wade's choice of landing strip was moot. He had no choice, the closest being the one. Any other simultaneous incoming traffic could result in a massive disaster. He mentally shoved that risk aside, having no other option. The plane he controlled was dead, but if it had enough momentum for him to reach the start of the runway asphalt, he had a chance. A slim chance, but a real chance. Complicating matters, however, was the oncoming darkness. Daylight about to take its final bow. Just as Wade commenced his dead stick approach, a large commercial airliner, engines protesting, screamed above his head while regaining altitude in order to avoid the runway collision Wade feared. The turbulence resulting from the flyby shook their much smaller craft and thundered in Wade's damaged ears. He renewed his focus on the runway landing signals, navigating the descent as best he could against the backdrop of a blinding setting sun. Seconds later, he felt rubber meet tarmac, but the stable feeling did not last. The plane dipped to the left, causing its wing to momentarily scrape along the airstrip's surface. Julia, looking through a window, could see sparks caused by the friction. Wade manipulated the W-shaped control yoke, turning it to the right, causing the plane to compensate by rolling in that direction. His maneuver worked. The wounded aircraft finally attached itself to the earth and decreased speed along the narrow runway. They were safe and could hear the sound of several approaching emergency vehicles. Julia unbuckled and attended to her patient. Wade did not move, not a muscle, frozen. He finally unclenched the controls, lowered his shoulders, and allowed his torso to rest upon the padded high back seat. He was drained, totally empty. Julia greeted two teams of first responders. One group went about examining the aircraft for possible fuel leaks and explosion risks, while the other quickly attended to the incapacitated pilot. Julia returned inside the plane and gently coaxed Wade to abandon ship. "When did you learn to do that?" she asked, looking up to meet his steady blue eyes and caressing his cheek with her hand. "I was taught a while back." Actually, it was his grandfather, he recalled, who had trained him. As a young adult, Wade had logged enough airtime and experience to earn his wings, but soon abandoned the activity. He didn't enjoy driving, any kind of driving. Chapter 33. What is she doing here? Julia could not believe her eyes. Disembarking a black SUV stationed amongst the emergency vehicles on the runway was a pretty young woman dressed in a stylish business dress that complemented her loose, dark brown hair. "What is she doing here?" Wade heard the comment and turned to see Denary's linguist approaching him. "She works for me." "Is that so?" Julia responded, tartly. She had met this woman only once, briefly, a few weeks ago, and did not enjoy the experience. Wade smiled as the brown-haired beauty jumped into his arms and kissed him on the lips. Julia wasn't as startled as the last time she saw this happen, but was no less displeased. "Are you all right, David?" the woman asked in perfect English. "We're okay," he answered, glancing at Julia. The woman didn't turn to acknowledge Julia, instead maintaining her affectionate grasp around Wade's neck, hugging him again and again. "That was one hell of a sleigh ride." Wade acknowledged the truth of her vivid statement with a perfunctory nod. "Julia," he turned to his friend while trying to gently dislodge his language expert away from himself. "You've met Andalusia?" Julia nodded, superimposing a stern look onto her sweet face. Again, the woman ignored her. Wade excused himself and walked off to speak with Andalusia in private. Julia, left standing alone, was livid. Andalusia listened attentively to Wade's discourse with eyes that clearly meant more than business. Whenever they met in person, she had a hard time keeping her lovely hands off of him, and today was no exception. She first placed her arm into his when walking, then put her hand on his shoulder when they stopped, standing so close that her slender waist rubbed against his. Julia eyed the woman with thinly veiled jealousy, then turned away. When their short conversation ended, Julia turned back towards them to witness the two part ways with a kiss on the cheek that seemed less innocent than customary polite versions. Wade came back to her. "We need to give our statement to the authorities and move quickly." He led Julia inside one of the emergency vehicles. It took off and drove them to the terminal. "Andalusia will be waiting for us outside with her van. All is arranged." Julia decided to say nothing. She wanted to say nothing. She had hoped to stay silent, but she couldn't. "What is going on between you and that woman?" "How do you mean?" Wade asked, genuinely perplexed. "You cannot keep your eyes or hands off of each other." "What are you talking about? We work together." "You work with Firebird. She's a beautiful woman." "That she is," he responded matter-of-factly. "Well, why don't you ever look at her like a man does, like a man should?" "I don't mix business with pleasure." "What about Andalusia?" "That's different. We dated and broke up before working together." Despite their short, intensive, passionate relationship, long ago ended, Andalusia had not completely moved on. She had fallen in love with Wade, fallen hard, but now fully understood and accepted the nature of their business relationship, a professional association entered into some time after the end of their romance. Wade, like most who came in contact with Andalusia, marveled at her magnificent, exotic looks, delicately slim figure, light olive skin, and long wavy hair. She looked like a princess straight from the Arabian Nights. Her striking beauty was enhanced by amber eyes, aquiline nose, and a slight overbite that fired up most men, including Wade. He now longed, however, for a neutral, friendly rapport with his polyglot, but she still wanted and hoped for more. Working for the United Nations as a high-level translator often brought her to the Middle East. Wade knew, via his tracking device, that she was working at a Mediterranean seaside retreat near Alexandria, and asked her to meet him at the airport. Andalusia was able to temporarily absent herself from the conference. The airport security authorities were well aware of Wade's mission and thus quickly dispensed with the usual post-emergency procedures and sent them on their way. They rushed outside the terminal to Andalusia's van and took the rear seats. Julia buckled in, resolving to put her personal feelings aside and instead totally focus on their critical mission. "Where to, David?" Andalusia asked, turning her head back from the front passenger seat towards her former lover. "The library," he commanded, "but not the obvious one, the other one." Chapter 34. 15 minutes to E-time. Officer Hypatia of the ENP sent an ominous text update to Tristan and Wade that underscored the countdown to the scheduled E-time, the moment of exchange. The Egyptian authorities had decided to go ahead with the late afternoon rendezvous despite not yet having the ransom. The incontrovertible fact that the electrum pendant was still missing had not been divulged to the kidnapper. Wade wondered if this was the wisest course of action, but Tristan agreed with the police that the retrieval of her son was best guaranteed if knowledge of this crucial datum was kept hidden. The authorities had a plan to retrieve the boy without the pendant. Wade's task was still to find the ransom object. This case was like a pendulum, and he hoped it was swinging his way. He was not giving up, but time was running out. During the relatively stable and calm portions of their harrowing flight to Alexandria, Wade had contacted Andalusia, not for her language skills, but for her familiarity with the city. A child of United Nations diplomats, Andalusia was born in Egypt and raised by a Muslim father of Moorish ancestry from the Iberian Peninsula, and a Hispanic mother from South America, reared in Judeo-Christian traditions and beliefs. Alexandria was her birth city, and she knew it well, very well. It was this expertise Wade now wished to tap. "You don't want to go to the Biblioteca Alexandrina?" Andalusia asked as they drove away from the airport terminal. "Yes, but..." Wade hesitated, collecting his words. "Not exactly. The new library stands not far from the old. I want to go to the old." Andalusia immediately gave the driver directions in his native tongue. Wade retrieved the second photo of the boy sent by the kidnapper and gazed at his phone screen. Julia looked at his eyes, not the image. She noticed he was staring at the photo in a peculiar way. He did not seem focused on the boy or on the image as a whole, but instead on some detail displayed in the digitally captured moment. Julia was correct. Wade was focused on a shadow that was not seen in the first photo, but was clearly visible in the second. Rajiv, his IT guy from India, was able to enhance the image and locate a landmark proximate to the new library that would cast this type of shadow. With only minutes remaining before E-time and a young boy's life at stake, Wade was chasing shadows. Chapter 35. The air was less arid in Alexandria. North of Cairo, the Nile splits into two branches, or distributaries, that feed the Mediterranean. The Rosetta branch to the west and the Damietta to the east form the large Nile delta that flows into the Mediterranean Sea. The prevailing north wind, blowing across the Mediterranean, gives Alexandria a less severe climate from the desert hinterland. The Biblioteca Alexandrina is a major library and cultural center located on the shore of the Mediterranean. Shaped like a sun disk, the modern facility is both a commemoration of the famous Library of Alexandria that was lost in antiquity and an attempt to rekindle something of the brilliance that this earlier center of study and learning represented. Alexandria was not an ancient Egyptian city. It was founded in 331 BC by Alexander the Great and would later become a home for vibrant Jewish and Coptic Christian communities. The city had once been an important center of Greek culture and Hellenistic civilization and was known for its great lighthouse and library. The state-of-the-art biblioteca was inaugurated at the start of this new millennium. Some believe near the site of the old edifice, now lost to history, and whose ruins have never been found. Many educated guesses have been made about the exact location of the ancient repository, and Wade now wished to gamble on one of them. Chapter 36. While the police were secretly surrounding and securing the biblioteca, Wade planned to scour a building a few streets away. And Lucia relayed Wade's exact instructions to the driver. Nearing the location, and with only a few minutes left until the time of exchange, Wade grabbed the driver's shoulder for him to stop. "You all stay here and wait." "What? Stay here and wait, Julia." Wade opened the van door, ran a few hundred yards and entered a dilapidated building. Ascending a staircase, he navigated a tight passageway to a locked door that he confidently kicked open, without reserve. He entered. The air he encountered was hot and stale. It hung low and close. The large cluttered room was dimly lit by the setting sun struggling through a square, wood-framed, curtainless window. Through the glass opening, Wade could see the minaret of a mosque, but not just any minaret. It was the only one of its kind in Alexandria. The daytime shadow of this distinctive architectural structure had been frozen alongside the image of Tristan's boy in the kidnapper's second photo. Rajiv Mohandas, Denary's most junior member, had located the unique landmark using a high-end satellite imagery and mapping web service. By process of elimination, Rajiv had rejected all surrounding buildings except the one Wade now occupied. Wade was certain the kidnapper would no longer be in this loft, but surmised that the boy would. Indubitably left behind for the exchange. And he was right. Chapter 37. The upper floor space was crowded with stuff. Wade advanced further into what seemed to be the kidnapper's apartment. A home sweet home gone wrong. Walking the obstacle course of paraphernalia towards the lone window, Wade's eye caught the side of a familiar fake object. King Tut's coffin. Approaching the open casket, Wade knelt down before it and found Tristan's boy, positioned like in the photos, laying on his back, bound and gagged, but wide-eyed and alert. The American investigator explained to the youngster who he was, hoping to calm and reassure the child before releasing him from his restraints. Once untied and freed, the boy hardly moved, still frozen in this reproduction of the iconic casket. Immobile and speechless in his chillingly decorated former prison. Wade's ring vibrated with an incoming text from Hypatia, announcing the capture of the kidnapper at the biblioteca. It was over. Wade helped the boy out of the adorned container, which had been his home for the past 2 days. Unsure on his feet, the child's legs gave way as he stood, but Wade firmed him up. He was small for his age and delicate. Wade looked into his watery eyes and congratulated him on being a very, very brave boy. He asked the fair-haired lad if he was hurt or in pain. The youngster shook his head, then began fidgeting with a chain around his neck. "What's that?" Wade asked the boy. In lieu of a verbal response, the child simply lifted the chain from under his shirt, causing something to gleam into Wade's eyes. Attracted by the glitter, Wade focused his attention on a tiny round object precariously attached to a thin silver chain. Hanging from the boy's neck was an amulet. On one side, an image of the sun, a disk. On the other side, hieroglyphics within an oval enclosure. Shiny and bright, the small object caught the day's final rays from a low morning sun. It was the Electrum Pendant. Chapter 38. Wade was glad to see Officer Hypatia at the local police headquarters and congratulated her for the ENP's excellent work. She responded in kind for his efforts. Denary's intelligence agent, Sasha Kirov, had earlier confirmed her impeccable credentials, unblemished record, trustworthiness, and competency. Wade was pleased the report had been accurate. Along with Julia and the boy, they stood in an oval meeting area, Andalusia having left the city and returned to her UN duties. Tristan entered the chamber looking for her son. Seeing his mother for the first time since his enlèvement, he bounded deep into her arms and offered a giant hug, a well of tears, and a few heartfelt words of affection. Overwhelmed at seeing, touching, and finally hearing her son speak again, relieved and content, she wept with joy. Witnessing this happy reunion caused Julia's own tears to flow. Noticing this, Wade moved close, giving her a soothing, one-armed embrace. As everyone involved in the drama slowly regained their composure, questions were asked. I read the kidnapper's final message revealing the Biblioteca exchange instructions. How did you nab him? Wade asked Hypatia. The suspect had hoped to retrieve the pendant at the specified drop-off point and escape, disappear, leaving the boy behind, where you found him. Fortunately for us, he was not very good at this, an amateur, not a seasoned career criminal. Did he talk? Yes, he did, Hypatia informed. He is a religious zealot, a fanatic hoping to revive a dead religion, Atenism. He claims the sun god spoke to him when the pendant was unearthed and believes the object has special powers that would connect him directly with the Aten and restore the ancient cult to prominence. Hypatia shut her eyes momentarily and shook her head in dismay. We haven't yet told him that the precious object he so vigorously and violently sought was already in his possession, hanging around his hostage's neck. How did the pendant get onto the boy's chain? Asked Julia. I think he simply took it and hung it there, Wade surmised. He wandered into his mother's tent just as she left for her caucus. He saw the shiny object and innocently attached it to his neck chain. Wade looked down at the youngster. Right? The boy nodded. Hypatia continued the storyline. The kidnapper entered the tent, grabbed the boy and covered his mouth, then searched for the object. Not finding it, and sensing the tent was about to be reoccupied, he fled by the rear flap, carrying the child and eventually reaching his home, a flat he had transformed into a shrine to the Aten, here in Alexandria. Any accomplices? Tristan wondered aloud. Not that we know, volunteered Hypatia, and none according to the kidnapper. He had heard about your dig and wanted to be part of it, so he traveled to the site and was hired by your crew chief as a day worker. Silence filled the space as everyone looked at each other with nothing left to say. Julia dried one last tear, closed her tired eyes, and reached for Wade's hand. Epilogue. Julia had gotten more than she had bargained for when accepting her friend's invitation to the desert, but she had no regrets. Back in Cairo, after a good night's rest in separate split-level hotel suites with spacious balconies overlooking the Nile, they planned to while away the empty hours from dawn till dusk. Wade played the gallant host for his lovely guest, treating her to a rooftop breakfast, followed by a proper visit of the Giza pyramids, then a delicious buffet lunch, and now a stroll through the narrow lanes and byways of Khan el-Khalali, the city's major souk in the Bazaar district. "I promised you shopping, sweetheart." She smiled warmly at him. "I like a man who keeps his promises." First, there came a murmur from the crowd of onlookers, and then a steady stream of people moving towards them. They encountered enthusiastic shouting, arguing, haggling, buying, and selling. People of all shapes and sizes standing, running, coming, going. The aroma of strange foods filled the kiosks in the marketplace, with some merchants hanging cards in the windows announcing that several languages were spoken in their shop. Wade expected Julia to go on a buying spree, but she didn't, instead preferring to cling to him and rest her head against his broad upper arm as they slowly walked through a wonderful kaleidoscope of sounds, colors, and smells. The allure was all around them. Unhurried, they stopped at a coffee house, a cafe for her, and a local beer for him, and a few puffs, for them both, from the complimentary shisha water pipe. The day was hot, and the drinks were invigorating. They then descended to the river and hired a felucca for a dreamy float along the tranquil waters of the Nile. They relaxed, shaded from the hot midday sun. She leaned back, melting into his chest and arms. He lowered his nose close to her hair, partaking of her sweet fragrance. She lifted her head up with glowing eyes. On cue, he lowered his. There was a gentleness in his face that warmed her. They kissed for a brief moment, then kissed again, for longer and in a different way. The passion was real, sincere, enjoyable. Until his watch interrupted the moment with a signal of an incoming message. It was his assistant Jenny from his New York office. "Urgent. Your mother is ill. Rush back immediately." The end. I'm Mark Vinet, and I hope you enjoyed the listen.